Welcome to the design competition phase of RFQ 22077, the design services for EXPO Idaho Park Development. I'm Bob Perkins. I'm the procurement director for Ada County. And this is a project the county is really excited about, and we look forward to seeing our finalist presentation this afternoon. But before we jump into presentations, I would like to acknowledge a few folks. First, I want to acknowledge our board up here. We have our chairman, Commissioner Rod Beck, Commissioner Ryan Davidson, and Commissioner Kendra Kenyon. And we also have our evaluators up at the dais as well.
I don't care what I mean.
Also want to thank our three finalists today. That's Rios, the Land Group, and Port for being here. I know that you guys took a lot of time and effort on your presentations, and we look forward to seeing them. So before we get started on the presentations, I also want to thank a few folks. I want to thank our Board of Ada County Commissioners for their help and support in championing this project. I also want to thank our clerk auditor recorder's office and EXPO Idaho, our operations department, prosecuting attorney's office, and our procurement staff for bringing this project forward. So a little bit about the process. How did we get here? So we had 6 firms submit qualification statements for this RFQ. And of those, we have the 3 top finalists presenting today. So they were selected based on an initial evaluation score. And today's presentation will be worth up to 50 points. And those 50 points will be added on to their initial evaluation score to determine a final ranking. So each firm will have 45 minutes to present today, and we're going to have 15 minutes for our board and evaluators to ask questions. Now, I just want to note that only our board and evaluators will be asking questions today. It is our intent to present the final rankings to our board on October 11th, 2022 in their open business meeting. And for today, the order of presentations, they were determined by random drawing. And the order is as follows. Rios will go first, starting right at 1 o'clock. The Land Group will go second, starting at 2 o'clock. And rounding out our presentations today will be Port, and they will be presenting at 3 o'clock. So I just want to say good luck to our presenters today. And Rios, the floor is yours.
Bob, before we start with Rios, I just wanted to make sure that the Board of County Commissioners formally acknowledged all the work that's gone into where we are today. It's been a 3-year plus project for all of us, and we have a Citizens Advisory Committee that we put together about 3 years ago, and I just wanted to thank those that are here and those that are not here. Raise your hand if you served on the Citizens Advisory Committee. I know we've got a few of you in the room. Thank you so much. They put in a lot of their time. Andrea Fogelman up front here was a co-chair along with Ed Lodge, and they did a tremendous amount of work that really set the stage for what we're seeing here today. And then I also wanted to thank the ULI, Urban Land Institute. They came in and they helped us for another year of this project, helping us understand the financial assessment and how we could leverage dollars and partnerships in the community, et cetera. So I wanted to give thanks to them as well. And then last but not least, Bob Batista and his EXPO Advisory Board has now stepped in, and they are helping to shepherd this project all along the way as well. So just wanted to say thank you to those 3 groups.
And is it possible to get our presentation up, please? Or do we need to do that? Sorry, thanks.
I think.
What do you want to try to do? Get the big screen on here?
Here, I can open it.
Push that button.
No, thank you. That's right. No, this button right here.
Oh.
Okay, thank you. I think we're ready. I want to introduce myself. I'm Brent Jacobson. I'm a studio director with Rios, studio director in landscape architecture, and I'm really excited to be here with some colleagues and some of our partners on the team to present our vision for the EXPO Idaho Park site. We have Jason Shinoda from our office, Jeff Dunn from our office, and then also from our local partner, we have Will Howard, Emily Voges. Let me go ahead and see if we can advance. Great. So what we wanted to cover today with you is just go through a little bit who we are, what our background is, what we think the opportunities are at this site, this really amazing site, and what we think the concept can be, at least with our initial vision. We've assembled a really great team. I'm really, really excited about the people that could work with us on this project, not just our local partners, but our whole sub-consultant team. We're coming from a Portland office, but we have basically most of our team is based in Boise, and that's really important to us. We are a national firm, and we look at projects around the country and around the world, but we really care about place, and we care about local places. So building a team that has local expertise and real knowledge about how to build, how to operate, how to think about culture is really, really important to us. And that's really what our mission is. Our mission is that we like to design, we call it design is never without story. We like to tell a story through public space. And we like to tell a story about the places that we build and the people that we work for. So these are some examples of projects we've done around the country, as also our partners have done locally. And each of these projects look a little bit different, and they're intentionally different because what we're trying to do is actually design a project for the place. We don't want to be that you look at a park and you know who designed it. We actually want you to look at the park and be curious about who designed it, and then find out that this is like a great park for this area and for Ada County. As part of that, we engage. We think very, very critically about how we talk with our clients, how we talk with their communities and their stakeholders. We use different techniques. Some of them are really splashy. We make models. We do all this kind of stuff, right? And it's intended to be interactive because we bring a set of values and interests and perspectives, but really we're here to listen, and we're here to learn, and we're here to try to translate what we think is best for the site through the lens of the people that we're working for. But we also like to do it in a way that is resilient. We all know that we're facing drought, heat, all these kind of challenges, right? And we're also facing growth, and these things stress where we live. And so how we think about that is really, really important. So when we thought about this project, we wanted to make sure that we try to design some solutions that really build in future resiliency for the site, and that also that future resiliency can have a regional impact. So how did we rethink EXPO? It's an amazing site. It's 88 acres on a river. It's a former horse track, which some people may hate, some people may love, but it's very dynamic, right? It's a very dynamic space. So we were super excited when we saw this opportunity to be on it. And we asked ourselves some questions when we started it. And one of those questions was, basically, how do we make this a place for community, but do so in a way that is really ecologically responsive to the Treasure Valley? That's really important to us. But we also want to do it in a way that is actually really interesting all the time. You know, that was one of the key things that people highlighted, was the issue of user experiences. We all build beautiful things, and you go there and nobody's there. You're like, what do we get wrong? Why are people not using this? And for us, that really is about programming, is we want to think about a series of experiences that can change and evolve and be flexible enough to engage people all year long. So that's going to be one of the things you'll see, hopefully, in our proposal today. Some of those principles that we brought in, though, when we thought about it, was about fostering community. Parks are great places for people to do so many things, but one of the things we love about parks is that they allow people to connect to each other, but they allow people to connect to a community and actually have a shared identity, right? We want this to be a place that people remember, and it gives them an enhanced sense of being part of the collective of Ada County or the Treasure Valley. We also really want to engage the river and promote resiliency, like I talked about before. You have this amazing resource. You know, we joke about it, like people take pictures on the river in Boise, and people are like, are you out in nature? And it's like, no, we're in the city. This is an amazing thing that people live next to, and it is like your front door and a gateway to basically all these amazing experiences of where you live. And part of that is connecting to nature. It's not surprising to people who probably live here, but the reality is a lot of people don't connect to nature enough, and it has serious human wellness and health impacts, right? And so we think it's really important in the spirit of this place to make experiences that people can connect to nature, not only so they can get out for themselves, but more importantly, they can connect with each other in nature, because that's such a story of the West. Part of that is also thinking about shade and areas of respite, how people can find places to gather and adapt to different seasons, and that they can gather together. A couple other points. We're very interested in the idea of walkability. So you're going to notice something in our plan. I'm going to preview it, and others are going to talk about it. We don't have cars in our plan. Our cars are all on the perimeter, because this park is for people. We want people to be the center of this park, and we want there to be a lot of walking and biking and places for people to move through the park together. We also are really engaged in this idea of how is it play for all. And I know play oftentimes, I have young kids, play is what we talk about when we talk about kids, but the reality is play is good for all of us, right? Whether it's biking, hiking, fishing, you name it. We're all engaging in things that help our brains grow, that promote creativity and actually promote connection to each other. And we think play needs to be important, and we want to do it all year long in this park. And if we do that right, we think this park is really regional infrastructure. You know, it's a county park, and we think it's a park that, although it'll have a really big impact on all the people right around it, probably some of your citizens advisory group is really interested in what people are saying because they're going to look at this. But the reality is it's going to impact this entire valley and have a lot of reach. And if it does that, I think it's going to build on this amazing legacy that we've really observed here, which is that I think somebody told me this, so I'm going to borrow their line, but other places people build museums, in Boise people build parks, right? And you have this amazing legacy of all these gorgeous parks along your river that are an amazing asset for the community. And I think this is hopefully this next asset, this next jewel that we can add into the community. So with that introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, just to talk through a little bit of our initial impressions and then take you through the site.
Thanks, Brent. So, there's a lot of amazing things about EXPO Idaho, as Brent mentioned, but one of the things is also that it's very, very large. I think it's almost 90 acres. So one of the things I'm going to go through before I kind of tee off with Jason is some of the larger picture ideas about how we're thinking about the site in general. So right now, when you go out there, there's the river experience, and then there's the kind of expansive lawn, and there's the track, and there's the grandstand. And the relationship between those two experiences is kind of thin. It's kind of narrow. There's the river, and then there's the lawn experience. Another potential challenge is that the FEMA map was just released, showing part of the site, kind of the northern half, potentially being partially flooded in the future. So we want to make sure we address that, but also use that as a kind of design inspiration for how we think about the landscape and the park and maybe even some of the architectural ideas. So our proposal in concept, and Jason will run you through some of the detail on how it gets designed, is to bring the river into the site. So we want to take that thin margin, that relationship between the river and the lawn, and expand that margin and make that a place for people to inhabit. Another challenge with the site is access and porosity. So right now there is some access for vehicles and some access for pedestrians, but of course we want to expand that access through the site and really allow people to access it from all sides and in different ways and in different times of the year. So the second part is bringing the community to the river. So we want to widen the river experience, but we want to make sure that the community is invited into the park and that they have ways into the park, and that kind of overlap between the river expansion and the community coming in is really where the project lives. The third part of this is site history. So there's a track, there's a racetrack on site. Brent mentioned the kind of history of that. There's the grandstand building, and there's a bunch of other buildings on the site right now. So I think you'll see ways that we're thinking about that. There's a lot of discussion in our office about, do we keep the grandstand? Do we keep, what version of it do we keep? And I think we're kind of doing a more surgical approach to how we deal with some of those things. So we kind of got three parts. We're bringing the river in, we're bringing the community in, and then you'll see keeping a sort of version of the track experience, and then celebrating that and kind of expanding on that experience and making it more vibrant and more exuberant. So here's a little kind of aerial blow-up diagram of that track experience. So on the lower left, we're putting the track on a diet. Right now I think it's about 45 feet wide. We're going to minimize it just a little bit, make it about half that size, and we're going to scale it to human use. So it feels right, it feels like it's the right scale for people. And then we've blown up a few kind of vignettes of different experiences along that track as it changes. So in some cases it becomes kind of built into the landscape as an amphitheater. In some cases it emerges and becomes a bridge. In some cases it sinks into the landscape a little bit. And then we're introducing two new structures. You'll see the grandstand there on the lower left. And then next to that's a new community center that will have events. You could rent it out for weddings or bar mitzvahs or other things, birthdays. Maybe some educational opportunity in there as well. And then the River Center on the upper right is a new structure that we're proposing. And we believe that relates much more to the river activity. So you could imagine kayak rentals, canoe rentals, swimming lessons, and educational things for the community happening up there. And then this is a kind of deep dive into what we're thinking for the grandstand. Again, Jason's going to show you the renderings and the more finished views of it. But diagrammatically, we wanted to talk about it because it's such an important building on the site and an important building to our proposal. So the first step in the upper left is to open it up on the ground so that when you're coming into the site from the west and you're looking in through the park, you get some porosity underneath it and you can see what's happening on the other side. On the upper right, we then come in and activate it with some landscape, some benching, maybe some fire pits, and then some visitor center, food and beverage, and other programmatic activities that really activate that connection and play into the kind of plaza space that you see between the grandstand and the community center. In the lower left, we punch a few holes in the existing grandstand to connect that experience up vertically and visually and experientially to what's happening down below. And then in the lower right, we come in with some additional structure on selective parts of it to add more shading to shade some of these activities in the summer. And then the last few things I'm going to say before I hand it over to Jason are that you'll see color. You see it in the model, and you'll see it in a lot of our slides. It's really important to us as an office. So we're responding to things like the landscape, like the seasonal changes, and the other things that are happening locally to Boise and the county. And we're using it to create a sense of place, to use it as a placemaking tool, but also as a wayfinding tool to help orient people. It is a large site, so we want to make sure that we're using color effectively to kind of draw people's eye around and let them know where they are. Thank you. Jason?
Thanks, Jeff. So I'll take you through our conceptual design. And the first thing you'll notice about our plan is that we are, as Jeff said and Brent mentioned, we're really embracing the river, and we're bringing the river into the site as much as we can. Coupled with that, we're really programming and activating every space that we can in the site to create a really vibrant space for every type of community. And then we are kind of tying a bow around the whole site, right? We're using the track, we're using these other relics and elements to signify and give identity and to increase wayfinding through the site. Something that's really important is this idea about embracing the kind of seasonal flux and the dynamic aspects of the river. And so we're proposing to expand the floodway in the river through 2 channels, which create different island moments at the north end of the site. This increases capacity for flooding events. We're embracing the idea that water will rise and recede through the life of the year. And that's okay, and it creates more interesting experiences for users. And then as we kind of move towards the community, we know we have a slightly drier condition, so we're using topography and landform and bioretention basins to cleanse water and protect water quality for water that's going to be entering the river. And so kind of playing with that flux of the dynamic nature of the flooding, the cleansing of the water, and using that to our advantage to create a multitude of experiences in the site. That corresponds then to setting up these 3 different conditions, which we're thinking about as different habitat zones for the park. And so you get the riparian woodland habitat along the river, which transitions to a wetland marsh in the middle, and to grassland meadow towards the south end of the park, and all of these supporting native species, native habitat zones, and using as much native planting as we can, embracing seasonality, embracing different expressions of the different landscapes of Idaho. And that also corresponds to how we're starting to think about programming the park. So we go from a really highly activated, community-focused, activated south end with a lot of our program that I'll walk you through to more of a passive or educational and recreational zone in the middle, and really to this kind of immersive nature experience out on the river's edge. As we mentioned, we're really passionate about making this a people-oriented place, and part of that is really just keeping cars out of the middle of the park. We really don't want to see cars in the center of the park. We're introducing new car parks at the southeast, southwest, and northwest side, as well as along the east side, and in focusing most of our vehicular access at those points, and connecting them to the park through the track experience. So we have a kind of main front door entry near the grandstand in this new community center building, and secondary entrances on the other side of the park. The track itself becomes a multi-use path for different modes of circulation, so cycle path, speeds of faster speed, slower speed, places to sit as well, also good for access and maintenance, so we get kind of a built-in access track around the whole thing. And then a series of pedestrian walkways that connect the rest of the park experiences through secondary pathways, all of these being fully accessible. Oh, two more points to mention, connections to the green belt at the top end. And as mentioned, we'll kind of go through each of the spaces, but packing in tons of program and activity throughout the whole park, and maximizing areas of shaded tree coverage. So I'll take you through three blow-ups of the site plan, starting at the south end. So around the grandstand, we have the EXPO Gateway, which is what we're calling it. We have a flexible plaza space that surrounded by the grandstand and the new community center, and this could be used for festivals, fairs, you name it. In front of that grandstand, we're introducing a stage with a sloped amphitheater bowl, so you could have events on either side of the stage. Then south of the community center, what we're calling the play gardens, play areas for toddlers, play areas for all ages, more formal sports courts, a nature play zone, and a flexible lawn space, pump track on the southeast side. And then in the middle of the track area here, the sports meadows. So using 4 baseball fields and the flexible sports field with a centerpiece of a mound overlooking all the sports fields in the middle. And using bleacher seatings on those mounds to be able to see what all of the kind of activities are around there. Looping around the whole thing is this track experience, and here you can see a view of that track with areas that maybe peel off to create shade pockets for seating and for looking out onto the fields. You'll see in the distance here, this is a rendering of our community facility. And we've been kind of inspired here by snowdrift fences and some of the vernacular timber constructions that we see in the region. So focusing on heavy timber construction as a sustainable means to create these buildings. A winter scene here of the EXPO Gateway. You can see here the grandstand, fully flexible underneath. So really this porous experience that allows for lots of different activities, festivals. You can see here the kind of cut-throughs that we're introducing up into the grandstand to get up in there and get the views of the fields beyond. Flexible plaza in front of the grandstand that could be used for things like ice skating in the winter. The sloped roof of the community center, a sloped roof also that could be used for things like sledding and skiing in the winter. Then moving on to the central area here, we have the wetland pond area, and the centerpiece being what we're calling the Adventure Island. All of these things are connected by the track and the track bridges, and the river center that spans the track on the east side. So here we're introducing things like beaches, areas for rock climbing, bouldering, fishing, ropes courses, and then also more passive areas for viewing wildlife, picnicking. Here's a view of the wetland ponds. You can see some of the track in the background, the bridges, but really kind of bucolic area here for enjoying the wetlands and the mounds. And then this is that bridge moment that goes over the channel with a pier overlooking some of that wetland, the nature center in the back. And the river center Jeff mentioned. Using the lower levels here for float rentals, kayaks, that kind of thing. We know that the lower level here would be inside the flood zone, so lifting all the program up to the second level will allow us to embrace that dynamic landscape. And keeping all of the educational facilities and classroom facilities up on the second level with views over the wetlands and across the park. Introducing beaches on either side of the channels and areas for kayaking and other recreation. And then the northern edge of the park, much more passive. We take you all the way out to the river. We've got more areas for water activities, floating, paddle boards, fishing, a dock and boardwalk along the river's edge for fishing, connections to the greenbelt, and this pier that extends all the way and takes you all the way to the edge of the water. In the upper northwest corner, we're looking at a smaller dog park area, or a large dog park area, a smaller park area, and probably another opportunity for another cafe or restroom facility up at this corner. And this is what you might experience when you're out on the river at the end of the day or the beginning of the day, surrounded by beautiful nature and using some of these boardwalk and pier elements to take you out to the river.
Thanks, Jason. So we wanted to end on talking about how this park might get used throughout the year. That was important to us, right? That can actually get activated. And so you're going to see a series of diagrams where we think there's probably 10 other ideas that we could activate the park on that aren't on this. But we're showing 4 just to highlight how in spring people might come and use it for different community-oriented events. They might come to see the birds come back, right? See migratory waterfowl. Or they might come in just the time of year where they go fish for a certain type of thing because the season's opening. But in the summer, it might start to shift, right? We might think about how people gather in mass because the weather's nicer and you can actually have concerts and, movies in the park. You could also have larger events like fun runs. Actually, somebody was nice enough to talk to us beforehand about how they thought this could be great if you could use the track as running, right? Those kind of ideas that you can embed into this scheme. But also, of course, take advantage of the amazing outdoors and the weather. And then thinking about fall, it starts to shift again, but it still can be impactful, right? We can start to think about how you might program some different festivals, how you might program things like a turkey trot or some other events, and then also fall sports, right? My kids are just finishing soccer right now, so. And then in winter, we think there's an opportunity that even though the winter is not permanently white, when it is snowy, there's a chance to take advantage of this, right? To maybe go cross-country ski here or potentially look at sledding, but then also look at seasonal pop-ups like an ice ribbon or an ice rink or other things like that and markets that may activate this in the winter so that people still get outside and enjoy the beautiful place you live in. We were asked to look at phasing, and so this is not a hard diagram in the sense that we know this is always flexible about how we think about building this, and it might turn into 4 phases. But we think in phase 1, it's critical to think about in our scheme a couple ideas, and one of those is we really want to build the infrastructure, or the kind of backbone of the park, right? The structure of the park. So we're looking at, you can see in yellow, this idea of trying to get the track converted, right? And making that this kind of organizing loop. And then looking at a couple big moves about trying to get these channels that may come into the site. And then thinking about the right levels of programs that provide recreation and get people to the park and using it. Things like playgrounds that people always use, right? Things that get people used to using the park and really engaged in it. And then as you go through the process of a lot of the complicated things that were introduced to us early on about moving land around and all those kind of things, and you're ready for phase 2, we think then in green, that's how you can start to infill. And you'll notice we kind of put the grandstand building in phase 2. It's not because we don't think it's really important, but you can use the grandstand building the way it is now potentially, right? So you could have a phase 1 and still do events in the grandstand building and then reimagine it in phase 2 to basically finish the park, right? And start to think about how you infill more formalized fields. And so there's ways that within phase 1, you could still use a lot of the site, I think in a lot of the ways we're proposing in phase 2, but then use that opportunity in phase 2 to really kind of dive in deeper. We did think about it, about where we'd want to spend it, but I think we thought that the grandstand is a really interesting icon for the site, even if you don't change it immediately, and does a lot of great things, but that the track becomes the story of the park, that people get to move around and get these experiences and these sequences, and that these potential new buildings, if that's where we want to go program-wise, are really community-facing, right? They are really about putting in service for the community to come in and engage with the park in a more direct way, whether it's the community center or the river center. And so to end, we're excited to have a discussion with you about what we've shown you and talk a little bit more about our plan and answer a lot of questions. But we just think this is an amazing opportunity for you. And you're fortunate if you have 3 great teams. I'm not going to lie. Any of the people that you're going to see today will do a great job for you. We just think that our ethos is really looking at how we can tell the best story on this site for you and really make it such a compelling place that it's memorable. And I think that the strategies we have employed, we hope really are going to invite people adjacent to the site, but really people throughout the valley to come experience this project and make it an ongoing legacy for Ada County. Thank you.
Thank you. Question? Bob, is this our question and answer time?
Yes, I can get my mic to work. But yes, if you guys want to, as a board or evaluators, want to go ahead and ask questions, now's the time.
All right, anybody have questions?
Yeah, so you mentioned cafe or restaurant. So I think food is always something really important when you have a park of this size. You can get lost in it and then all of a sudden your kids are starved, right?
Yeah.
And you don't want to have to go jump in your car and drive away. So tell us a little bit more about where you envision cafes or even, we talked about food truck
Yeah.
centers or something like that?
So it's a great question. We located a couple possible locations. Basically, I guess I'll point to the screen so you can see if I can get the pointer to work. Well, in the grandstand, so in that diagram of the grandstand, I can pull that back up if that's helpful. We looked at, when we took all the cladding off and took out the guts of it, was infilling this program. We think F&B could go in there, and we think that'd be really great to help anchor the entry of the park and the arrival of the park. We think there's a couple doors to the park, but that's kind of the more ceremonial front door in our design right now is what we're thinking. And then we think that plaza, we can design that plaza to also be a place for food trucks or those kind of pop-ups and stuff. You will notice we did show it as kind of a phase 2 building, and I think we would want to work through it, but there's some nice models along the Greenbelt right now of these kind of F&B along the Greenbelt. So you can kind of see in the physical model or online it's the white block in the upper left, and in the physical model, it's the gray block down here. We were talking about a proposed F&B that could get phased in there. And I think that would give you something that's sort of along the river, and then you have the grandstand in the center. We hadn't necessarily programmed it over by the river center, but we would anticipate like bathrooms or some other facilities, right, that help distribute that. But that's where we were thinking now.
Right, thank you.
Yeah.
If I may, have you game planned the logistics of interfacing with local jurisdictions and moving that river?
Yeah. So
Walk us through that.
We anticipated that question. It's complicated. And so when we say moving the river, what we are talking about is we think these are overflow channels at a minimum. And we think if we can interface with them and actually get agreement to bring water onto the site, even if it's just in a high flood event, that would be amazing. We think it's likely just because of the location that if we excavate and we kind of reclaim some of that gravel and stuff, you're going to have water there, right? Our big vision is we'd love it to kind of help build out capacity of the river because we think it'll have a lot of benefits aquatically. But we know it's complicated. And so we're not trying to be naive about that. But we think it's important to the vision to think about how we can take this land and do that and make it a dual infrastructure, right? That it not only serves the river and the infrastructure you need there, but it's actually usable by the public in the park, right? As we're trying to get people into a river experience, and you have a certain amount of frontage now that you can kind of tactically interact with, and we're trying to see if there's a way that we can build in a second capacity. I know, Will, I don't know if you want to come up and talk about it, but our team has gone through negotiation on that. We have a water resources engineer on the team. We have people with experience doing that, and so it'd be something if that's attractive and interesting, as part of the scheme as we move forward, if we move forward with you, we would want to start that early and talk with them about what's feasible and what's possible. We don't think it invalidates the scheme. I think we can think through how that channel works, whether it's part of quote unquote flowing water or not, but we think it's an important move to think about and see if we can achieve it.
I have a question. You indicated that you had built into your plan, I think, 4 areas of something to be there, and there's 6 or 7 other areas where you're looking for other alternatives. Is that correct?
Yeah, sorry, what I was referring to when we were talking about programs or events that might happen throughout the year, we were highlighting 4, but I think you could have a lot of these, right? You could bring on a lot of different, whether it's recurring festivals or if it's different activities that could happen on site. So we were showing examples of how you could hold races here, right? Community races or 5Ks. We were showing examples of festivals. We were showing examples of sports programming. We were showing examples of way people might occupy it during certain times of year to experience the seasons, whether it's observing fall color or observing migration or looking at the snow and things like that. So that's what we were saying. But what else was your question, Commissioner?
Well, did you build it? Did you build in a process for evaluating those other areas?
Yeah, yes. So we didn't show diagrams of it, but we often do in our projects, including on this site, is we do test fit of flexibility, right? So we take this program, we lay it out, and then we actually go and we overlay 10 different programs on it and see how it works. And we try to develop into it the ability that there's future flexibility for you to adapt the park as you need to. We can't forecast everything that Ada County would want to do here, but we're trying to forecast as many as we can. But in the process, also creating, I guess, like a platform out of which you can do new things.
Okay, other questions?
So you're kind of anticipating a remodel of the grandstand, not building a completely new one. Did you look into what if we did a new one? Did you look at noise traveling and where noise would be directed? Because we do have residential on the other side of the river. And did you kind of do any analysis about sound?
We haven't conducted like a thorough sound analysis. You can see in the model and in some of the images, we are looking at how topography strategically comes in, part of balancing the site if we do excavation. But also, we think that's strategically a way to start to build in the ability to try to get some screening and noise. We did, Jeff mentioned it, we looked at whether we keep the track at all and whether we keep the grandstand at all. And I just think it's an amazing resource, and I know that might sound problematic to others, but it's an icon for the site, and it's like a super pavilion that you can program and do all these amazing experiences in that you probably wouldn't rebuild, but now that you have it, you can adapt it and do something really unique with it. We think that's really compelling. Could you do an amazing building if you took it down and put something there? Yes, you could do all the program we were suggesting in the grandstand if we put a new building in, but we think it's part of the kind of legacy of the site and iconography of the site, and we think it actually lends to people remembering the site, but also actually carrying that history forward in a new way. And at some point, people won't remember that it's a racetrack, they'll just remember it's the Gateway building or something, right? It becomes a new part of that. Adapting buildings are complicated, but generally the building you build is keeping it is more sustainable than replacing it, so we think there's value in that. And we think if we do it right and we analyze it right, it might be that we can make it cost effective.
Scott?
So when you look at the sports meadow here, did you have some determination of whether you had 4 baseball fields and 1 soccer, or was that just to illustrate the fact?
It was to illustrate. We did, our understanding was just making sure that there was a sense of comparable program with the park that might be aggregated into this land. And so we did the test fit of softball as a way of kind of understanding that. But it doesn't have to be softball and soccer. We were showing that for scale to understand the capacity.
So do you believe even that you could move the soccer field in front of the grandstand?
Yeah, like I said, this is a project that we've designed, without interaction with you, right? That's a competition. And ultimately, now that we interact with you, yes, I'd love to think about how we could put trace over this and start drawing it again. But yeah, the soccer could move. We would adapt the design to that, but yeah, of course it could move. Yeah.
I get you. Thank you.
All right. Scott?
Yeah, thank you. Great job on the presentation. A couple of questions, kind of a follow-up on Josh's question regarding the river. So seems like a pretty significant volume of water is depicted in this graphic here. We have about 300 cubic feet per second today. So how do you envision these side channels at this time of year or in the winter? How are they integrated into the site? What are people doing in and around those channels?
That's a good question. It's going to be different, right? It's going to be lower water, right? It's going to be a lower experience. And I think that is part of it's hard, but seasonality is part of where we live, and seasonality is important. And I actually think that coming and seeing a river that is lower and higher, it's part of the experience of living here, right? That being said, it's our job to take those edges and not make it feel like barren or unmaintained, right? You need to make it feel like it's a park for people. So I think it's a lot about how we curate those edges so that when it is high, if the water comes onto the site and it's high, it looks amazing. And then when it ebbs down, it's almost like a different experience, like the tide has come out and you get to do something different on that edge. So you're right. Part of where we did, just to talk about it, part of where we did locate like the river center, the nature center, in part is that it's close to that existing side channel, right? And so we are thinking about how you can still get to the main flow of the river from there, right? That still becomes a put-in point, and we're thinking about that. But we are exploring whether or not these channels and that kind of expression of seasonality and much more flux in capacity adds value to the site, and we think it does.
And a couple follow-ups. So the pond district, it looks like where you have depicted on the map there, or the graphic, is the existing sort of wetland infield pond, is that
Correct, yeah. We're basically pretty much preserving the one that's there. It might be reshaped a little bit in the plan, but in essence, the one that's there is there, and then we're exploring whether a second one comes in.
And then the pier you have identified there, is that a fishing pier, or I might have missed that in part of the presentation?
Yeah.
What does the pier
Yeah,
do? or
we
how
think
does
it
interact?
could be a fishing pier, and it's an overlook, and it's just
Okay.
a way to kind of engage that sense of being next to the water, right? I think that's what we went up and down the whole river when we were back here earlier, and there's a lot of great access to the river, but there's not really on this site. You know, there's the greenway goes by, but it's really kind of almost like a highway next to the river. And so I think we're looking at ways that become these punctures out to engage in the river. And so that was a strategy we thought was interesting. And yeah, programmatically, I think it would be a place for fishing. Some people might come out there to look at birds, right? We saw an amazing bald eagle across the river hanging out, right, when we were walking on site. So I think there's a lot of people who would engage in it that way, but we think it's really about actually getting these kind of selective moments that kind of push next to the river as opposed to just go by the river.
Oh, no, I think your design is very unique, very neat. I know this is a vision quest, so we didn't put any parameters
Right.
or any programming in, just to show us what your capabilities are and where you see this park going. I do think we do have some time constraints, and this would be true for all presenters. We're being funded by ARPA. We have to have certain deadlines and things done on a certain date. Anything that requires, and I see this channel thing maybe requiring an environmental document, which would put that whole thing out of the capabilities of this. But do you think this could be done without environmental document, moving these channels around and bringing all that water into the park?
No. I'm sure there is some environmental documents, and so that may be right, and that may be a challenge. I think we can still try to denote this as an option. I think there's a way that could be a longer-term conversation with them about how that happens. And so I think, you know, if the vision is interesting, because we asked for a big vision and we said we're going to go with a big vision. Logistics are hard on big visions, and it's something we'll have to talk to. And if we can't achieve this, I think we want to still create what feels like that you're next to the river and in this kind of riparian channel and this riparian edge. So whether the water ultimately can go from the river into the site, or whether we use a different way of denoting or getting the sense of water there, that's what the vision is of these, is that it really feels like you're actually an expanded edge. Because as I said, right now with where the site is, and Jeff mentioned it, it's very thin. You know, you go by and there's basically this kind of lower green and there's these great trees, and you can hear the river in the moments you can see it, but you're really just on this kind of asphalt corridor. And I think we want to make it feel like when you're in the greenway, you're actually inside the river, right? That channel is stepped over and you're immersed in that. And so that's why we're pushing that idea. But I completely hear you. We were being a little naive intentionally, just for the vision, but I also hear you. We don't want to be naive in a bad way, right? And so I think what it is we want that feel like that river experience is really kind of drawn in so that you're immersed in it as opposed to just going past it or by it.
Thank you.
So I'm going to follow up with one of the first things you said, that you listen and learn. So this board has been really, we find a lot of value in engaging with our citizens and engaging in the community, and we've spent a lot of time and effort doing that. So we want to make sure that we partner with someone who also values that. So talk us through your process of community engagement.
Sure, that's a great question. We do it a lot of different ways, to be honest. So our process, though, but in general, our process is we like to set out a series of engagements and really define like a map through that process, so that when we meet with the community the first time, they understand, here's what we're talking about, here's what we're here, here's where we're heading together. And then we like to set up these experiences with them. And we had a few images of it. We've done things like build models that people interact with. We've actually done exercises where we create like a game board and people have programs for a park and they go and make their own park, and we photograph it and we record that information. It becomes a way to kind of think about, oh, we all thought these 3 things were really important and nobody in the community wanted them. So we're not going to put them in the park. Let's think about what else should be here. But what we usually do in that is that we like to do public events. We like to do it in a style that is hopefully less about present and react, but more about engagement. So we usually like to set up stations and actually go through that process. And we're happy, we like to obviously partner with all the agencies or the communities that we work with, but that, we basically like to structure a series of engagements that way and make them as interactive as possible. We also have done, for a recent part that Jason just completed in Palm Springs, we did actually online meetings. We had online websites and polls to take surveys and get people's reactions to concepts and schemes, and recorded that data, and that helped influence where we went. And that's just kind of this like kit apart and set of strategies that we go through. But I think in all of it, it's really important to us that we are there to listen as opposed to tell, right? And so we try to set up a presentation that is really about a series of questions so that it prompts people discussion. And we really do find, you can tell, we're tactile, right? We made a big physical model as much as we did images to display. We want people to touch things because actually it kind of breaks down that barrier in design. It's not as like, wow, that's a really beautiful image and I can't talk to you. People want to get down and they look at it and they find their house and they look at the map and they say, that's where I live and where would I walk to and how's this work? And when we do that, we find it's a really, really great process. Sorry, that was a lot. I don't know if I answered it in a very cohesive or very clear way, but in general, we're going to work with you to set out a schedule of engagement and go through what would be a series of workshops. And each of those workshops, we're going to have a kind of a focus of either questions we want to ask and try to get some feedback on, re-deliver that at the next workshop with the next series of questions to propose, and then through that process, hopefully come to what becomes one or two final schemes or proposals that the community supports, and we'll hopefully come to a public meeting and talk to you about and tell you why they think it's important. And that's kind of the general process we use.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
What kind of phasing have you contemplated in your plan?
So we did 2 big phases right now, but it could get smaller. I can click back if that's helpful. We had just shown this, and that was a little bit what we had originally been told in the RFQ about maybe like some funding sources in terms of the phasing and how that might work. It could get smaller, but I think we do think that there's, if possible, we like the idea if the track is an element that is important to the park, that the community supports and you support. We think trying to get as much of that as in phase 1 as possible is really fantastic because it kind of builds that circuit. It builds people moving through the park. It gets people used to using it. It is the wayfinding. It's that tool that kind of hangs the park together. The satellite programs can all kind of come over time, whether that's 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, 5 years, we do that all the time. And obviously construction's always complicated. Sometimes we build things in 6 phases, depending on what needs to happen, right? But that's kind of the general strategy of what we thought with this particular scheme.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
So we use the grandstand during the Western Idaho Fair. That fills up every year for 9 days, well, 7 out of 9 days. Did you have any thoughts about the park during the Western Idaho Fair? Would those be interconnected or would they sort of be separate entities?
I would love it if they were connected. I think that's great. I think part of that is the question about how the county views what things are kind of always accessible for the park and what things are accessible at select times for the expo. But I think you can design the grandstand and the space that we're creating there to feel connected to the expo and be part of it, and the park can still operate. People can still come and do everything. It's not like you're shutting the whole park down. We did explore ideas depending on how expo wanted to if it wanted to orient itself. Could you create more lawns or other programs that actually face the expo, kind of on that western side of the site, so that you could basically create 2 or 3 experiences that kind of connect into the park. I do know that the fairgrounds has an existing great area where they set up a lot of their events and rides and stuff, so we didn't want to co-opt any of the energy, but I think it's a great opportunity. In most of our parks, we end up talking with recurring event partners and basically test fitting and talking about ideas in the design that they think they could use the park strategically throughout the year a couple different times, and we think that's actually a great way to activate the park.
And then our river float, that's a big attraction in the summer. Yeah. And, it goes to Ann Morrison Park, and then further down you've got the White River Park, but that's not really part of the float at the moment. Did you have any thoughts on the interconnectivity with the river to the other parks and what kind of experience we could have with that?
That's a great question. I think obviously we've emphasized connecting to the river and getting people into that water or next to that water. So we do think to the extent that this can become a next destination or stop along the way, I think is fantastic. The way that this can be a staging ground for people to float would be amazing. I think it'd be interesting to think about how curated this park is compared to those other parks. I think one of the things you have as an opportunity here is hopefully to blend very clear recreational programming with this kind of more access to nature and natural programming, rather than there's a river park and then there's this park and there's this park. I think you have an opportunity to do a lot of those things. So whether this is a complement to those other parks in terms of what programs are here is a good question, but I think we want to really celebrate that connection on the Greenbelt, and I think we want to look at ways that this becomes kind of the next destination along the river.
Given that your presentation was concise, it allows for a lot of questions, so I hope that's part of your plan here. I was curious about, you mentioned the track a few times, and you indicated the track becomes the story of the park. I'm kind of curious, obviously you left the grandstands in, or the gateway, as a key feature. The track is prominent in your depiction here, and I'm just kind of curious. As I look at it, I could see it as connecting or circumventing the park, but I could also see the infield and those sports fields and activities. I imagine, kids and parents and bags coming across this thoroughfare consistently throughout the portion of a day, and maybe conflicts with that track as people are using it but trying to get inside and outside of that track. Did you consider that in your concept, or what was your expectation as people, if you have, hundreds of kids and parents trying to get in and out across that? if the track is widely used. Do you foresee any conflict with that type of concept?
I think it depends on how we program the track. I don't think it has to be a conflict. We're not thinking this is a velodrome, right? So there's a great cycling community here. They have great places to bike. We're not thinking that this gets taken over by people going 30 miles an hour on their bike, right? So I think when you think about how big this is, it's a 3/4 mile track, right? So when you think about that experience along the way, what we're really looking at is that there's a gateway or these places where people plug into it, and then it can kind of take them to something, and then they go off on side trails and they move through that. So I think we can work through that. I don't see it as a traffic conflict, I guess is what I'm saying. I think a lot of it is just how we detail and program the track to make it clear that this is a people space for all people. It's not necessarily a motorized space or fast-moving bicycle space.
I have another question.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that your team looked at the Citizens Advisory Report and possibly the ULI report. So tell us how this concept sort of creates synergy with those other three approaches that have been identified as community needs.
Sure. That's a great question, and we had a lot of questions about what was going to happen around us. And you have three scenarios around you right now, so it's a little bit hard. But what we really think about, and I think it was part of why we emphasized not necessarily as much vehicular circulation in the park and trying to make it a people space, is that I think whatever happens around you, you're going to have a lot more program. So whether that is that you do like a mixed use kind of development or kind of town center idea that was one of the proposals, whether it becomes more of an entertainment district, I think ultimately having this be a flexible green space where people can go be outside and participate in events and participate is going to benefit all of those things, right? So whether you're living near it, having a world-class park is great. It's an entertainment district. The ability to set up events here or partner with EXPO in that way, I think is really fantastic. And I think we can build in a lot of space and capacity for that with 88 acres. So I think it's very complementary because I think great open space in general just benefits anything you put around it, you know, unless you make really bad decisions about that. But I don't think you are. You already have a great start with the three scenarios you're planning, so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead.
They've made this great model here, and it's kind of hard to get a sense of it from up on the dais. I'm wondering if we could maybe go down on the floor and look at it, maybe have him sort of describe it as we're looking at it.
I'd like to see it too.
Would that be
Yeah.
all right?
Let's
Yeah,
spread
let's do
around.
that.
Yeah, let's go take a look.
Go look.
I want to touch it.
I got a feeling.
I got a feel for it. I'm trying to find where they have that. You're a little sensitive?
So you can obviously see where the river is. It's pretty easy to find, right? So what we're showing is basically that adaptation of the track that we've talked about, and also sort of the grandstand, right? It's starting to kind of key out how that sits in the site. This is the existing grandstand, but you can start to see how we're adapting it. Kind of see how we start to cut it open and build in these programs on the bottom. That's a staircase. But honestly, we did have some great ideas. I don't want to say anything particular to you know, this is the little eagle's nest up here is awesome, right? You know, it's such a great view, so we're like, you can do something like free line or something in some cool experience or slide or something. But yeah, this is kind of that.
I appreciate HQ as much as
ceremonial front door, right? With EXPO Idaho here. Basically arriving and being able to kind of park at a large park. Kind of drop off.
just trying to get me started. I don't, well, we could still do that, right? I'm not saying no. It's not an and or.
All my good ideas.
I try. Give me a good idea to try. I mean, this, yeah.
Yeah, but I get that one. Obligations.
That's the easy one.
And then, yes, those are what we talked about, yeah, so the cost of numbers. And then you can see all these secondary paths, this is like the meadow, right? Understand here, and looking at the meadow, and the kind of articulation topography, some sort of.
Appreciate you. I'm so lucky. I've never dealt with that one.
As you come around the track, you can kind of see the program is diagram.
Park. Are really low.
Maybe moving to a tree walk. Just to kind of come back. So there's still this. And that kind of comes back. This is the next trial. Yeah, that one right there. We like to use those keywords to evoke an image or experience, right? Obviously.
Oh, yeah, there was, he had a very
Right, and that's
bottom part.
phase one, bottom, so not the green part, the yellow corner of that.
Okay, all right. Well, they could incorporate it.
Then you come down to
They are required, they would require, but I don't.
didn't highlight as much, but in general, so how can we create this kind of back entry that makes it close to so that it's not all just we're trying to disperse traffic where it makes sense. If I know I just need to I've got a stroller, that's where I'm gonna park, right? Or if I need to get here and I've got all my clothes, but I can also get the
Although those are just
No, yeah, this is the that's the existing sorry, it was a little tacky. This is the retention pond, and we're looking at how we could potentially look at it as like if that's got enough capacity or if there's another way that we kind of create this kind of moment to collect the water. Sorry about the attackiness. No, I shouldn't. I'm like a child. It's okay, I love it. Hands off. What this is that's actually Remington. Yeah, so Remington is there, correct. And we were going to build it. Yeah, there's basically right now, if you go out there, the Emma Remington, there's So the green belt is here, right? And the existing bridge right there, and then it kind of continues across there, so that's how it goes in. And so we're looking at it across. All the questions you asked us right now. But regardless, I think the idea of coming into green belt is the parks. Possibly. No, we are gonna we'll have next week and a half, so if there is a need for you to see put in along the river there. But you were yeah. Basically, there's so it's inside there. Right. We located this strategically here. It's like this here, right? Back. We located it so you can
Been working away there. Because even like structures.
That would actually be.
Thank you so much.
Presenting today. How about a round of applause for Rios? They did a great job today. Next up, we'll have the land group. If we can have you guys come forward and start getting set up, please.
I got it. You want a water? Yeah, I got a glass here. I'll take this.
He was Stacy Nice. And I was like, oh yeah, I see
We are ready. Okay. Got it.
fair enough. Just I
Already got it ready.
I'm excited.
All right, I think we're ready for our presentation with the land group. If the evaluators and the board is ready. All right, land group, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thanks for hosting us today. I am Matt Adams with the Land Group in Eagle.
I'm Katrina Colm with Erstad Architects in Boise.
So I get very nervous for these presentations, even though I've done them a lot. If my face is red and my voice is cracking, I'm okay. If I hit the deck, we could call paramedics, please. We really appreciate the opportunity to participate in this design competition. We will bring, you've met us, we'll bring our full team, or we'll have them introduce themselves in just a moment. Today's presentation is really intended to express to you our vision for the EXPO Idaho Park development, your RFQ. We affectionately call it the park. So you're going to hear us say that a lot. Let's go ahead and get started.
Our team and this park are part of the ecology of Idaho, Ada County, Garden City, and the Boise River system. The park is unrestrained, free, and bold in its enhancement of the community through health, equity, and ecology. Those are our guiding principles, but what do they mean? Health, a state of complete emotional and physical well-being for humans. Physical, active, movement, play. Mental, alleviate stress, refuge, peace, calm. Environmental, clean, cool air, clean water. The park will contribute to an optimal state of health for the citizens of Ada County. Equity, ensuring everyone receives the appropriate investment for their circumstances through a recognition that each person may start at a different place. Justice, inclusion, joy, celebration, learning, access, participation, and potential. The park will be a catalyst for equitable investment in our community. Ecology, the relationship of organisms to one another and to their physical surroundings. Human environment, study, conservation, biodiversity, weather. The park will build resiliency and restore the natural human, plant, animal, and river systems. Let's meet the team. Again, I'm Katrina. I'm a Boise native, and as a park user, I'm thrilled to explore this part of the Boise River on my paddleboard.
And I'm Matt Adams. I'm from Rupert, Idaho. Now I live in Meridian. I'm a park user, and I'm excited to run the trails and the pathways at this park. We'll have our team introduce themselves now.
I'm Christopher Hawkins. I am a native of Sandpoint, Idaho, now a resident of Boise. I am a park user, and I'm looking forward to taking my family from East Boise down the Greenbelt to experience and enjoy the amazing world-class play opportunities at the park.
Hi there. I'm Bob Schaefer. I'm a Boise native, born and raised, and I'm excited to spend time along the river corridor here at Expo Park.
My name's Hayden Draper. I am from Mountain Home, Idaho, and I'm a park user. I'm really excited about experiencing the community gardens here at the park.
My name is Kira Wise. I'm from Victor, Idaho. I now live in Boise, and I am excited to spend time by the river at this park.
I'm excited right now to have brought our full team. We have Katrina from Erstad, our team Land Group. We work together all the time, and we were thrilled to team up on this project and then bring in our high-powered design team with us today.
Love it. As locals, we know where Expo Idaho is located, but let's look at it on a map to get some context. The site is a center and a continuation of other parks along the beautiful Boise River corridor. You've got Eagle Island State Park to the north and Barber Park to the south. We know Memorial Stadium, the Riverside RV Park, and Expo Idaho are all intended to stay as existing uses.
Continuing the conversation of context. Great design, authentic placemaking must be grounded in history and culture. This place at Expo Idaho begins with geologic history spanning approximately 11 million years. Human history begins with the Shoshone and Bannock tribes and Shoshone-Paiute tribes, beginning approximately 12,000 years ago. Settlement history begins with pioneers in wagon trains and Chinese miners and farmers. At one time, 25% of Idaho's population was Chinese, predominantly in this location. The modern era of this place begins with the establishment of the village of Garden City and then in 1949, which is later incorporated as the city of Garden City in 1967. Each moment in time that we recognize here has a unique history and culture. We are endeavoring to take on or absorb these cultures, this history, and express it in the work that we're doing and in the park design itself. We are striving to express this culture, the sacred connection to the land of the indigenous people, the ambition of the pioneer, the enterprise of a Chinese miner or farmer, and the intrepid spirit of modern-day Garden City. We envision that if we are successful at taking on these different cultures and histories, and we blend them up and mix them up, we can, or it will result in an unrestrained design solution, one that is grounded in this place and is authentic to Ada County, Idaho.
Let's take a moment to get oriented to our plan. If you'll notice, north is to the left, which is the river. You've got Glenwood running left to right on the bottom of the page, as long with Chinden running top to bottom on the right-hand side of the page. As the vision of the park started to come together, it naturally developed into these distinct areas. We called these areas districts, and you will hear us use that term as we move through the park today. Today, we are all park users, and we're going to take a quick moment to walk ourselves through our design. We're going to start in the community district, which is a connection to Garden City. We will walk towards the grandstand district, which is the primary park entrance for anyone driving to the site. We will take advantage of the existing grandstands and turf clubs. Let's meander to the field district. It's adjacent to the existing EXPO Idaho buildings, which we hope will create a symbiotic relationship. Strolling to the River's Edge district, appropriately named due to its adjacency to the river. Finally, to the Movement District, which is at the center of the park.
Okay. I want to take just a moment while we're still in this full plan view to highlight pathway connectivity and pathway network. You'll see that coming up through the rest of the presentation, but it's important enough to pause on it. The pathway framework is what supports all this movement and getting around between these districts. Without it, it's not accessible. You can't move around. This framework, which we've overlaid on top, is just to highlight what's there that you saw in white earlier. Wide paved multi-use pathways that provide abundance of access north to south or left to right on the screen. Greenbelt connection, extension, and connectivity. Sidewalks throughout the park, and trails and pathways where you can go into areas of discovery. This connectivity provides equity and accessibility for all park users. All right, let's visit the community district first. This district includes community gathering space, community garden plots. We do actually have low-impact storm drainage solution plugged in here as well because we are right up against Ada County Highway District roadway. Gathering garden, food truck area, food forest or pioneer orchard, and a kitchen and market incubator. So I'm going to back up. I want to point out, if you haven't noticed, that we went outside the boundary of what you showed for the park space. We envision working with partners and local agencies to expand this end of the park and hopefully engage more with the commercial the commercial activity and infrastructure of Garden City. So, but we're going to focus on our proposal here. These are some images that give you the character of this space, the community district. Now let's take a look at what it looks like in your actual park. So now we're looking toward the river to the north in the community district. We have the community gathering space. On the left, you can see what is the kitchen incubator. We have space for food truck activities. We have garden plots in the distance and a food orchard in the distance, a food forest. So I want to highlight one of the user experiences that I've talked about, this kitchen incubator. I don't know if you've heard that term or not. What is a kitchen incubator? Well, in simplest terms, it is a shared use kitchen in a licensed commercial space that is certified for food production. Our concept includes an associated market for selling of prepared food. So what happens there? Renters, members, they can use the kitchen on an hour or hourly basis or a day basis to produce food, take those products then to market. They can sell them on shelf space in the on-site market. Food entrepreneurs can benefit from shared kitchen and market space because these facilities help remove restrictive high-cost barriers. They allow specialty food businesses to start from nothing and grow. They reduce risk of failure because of low skill in management of a commercial kitchen or the understanding of maintenance. They provide resources related to distribution, marketing, accounting, etc. There are examples. We have a food kitchen incubator in Garden City called Twisted Kitchen. There's one in Salt Lake City called the Square Kitchen, and in Spokane, River City Kitchen, all successfully operating. So the question might be, why would you invest in a kitchen incubator? Well, kitchen and market incubators can drive economic activity, social interaction, and provide an exclusive experience for all citizens of Ada County. By embracing a culturally diverse set of producers and customers, the incubator can advance and sustain a vibrant food ecosystem in Ada County. Who's the end user? Everyone. Because you have producers, you have customers, this opportunity is open to all Ada County residents. Users tend to be, though, it's not everybody that uses a commercial kitchen. Users tend to be caterers, food truck operators, meal or box meal delivery vendors, pet food makers, personal chefs, bakers, street vendors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All right, we are going to move on to the Grandstand District. And let's see what's going on there. This district includes the program of youth sports fields, concert and performance venue, community gathering space, festival space, also space for use for cultural celebrations, and a youth learning center. So I want to highlight, well, first, let's take a look at what this looks like at your park, our park. So this is our view looking into the park. You can see in the background, there's a beautiful play structure. We don't get there till the end. We're going to make our way around the park. You've got concert venue that you can see to your left, set up very similar to how the Expo Fair sets up their concert venue now. You have people utilizing the green space, vendor tents. I want to highlight one of these user experiences that we brought up. That's the Youth Learning Center. We are proposing that we do an adaptive reuse of the existing turf club, keep the building, and then we turn that into a youth learning center. So what is that? A learning environment, classroom space, computer labs, outdoor space as well, used to support STEAM education for the youth of Ada County through school programs, summer camps, and strategic community partnerships. STEAM, as you may know, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. Why would Ada County want to invest in a youth learning center? This provides a safe place to learn and explore one's passion. This can help children develop critical thinking skills. This can develop a pipeline to the building trades and to higher education. And maybe most importantly, this can build a highly skilled local workforce. Who's the end user for this type of facility? School-age children living in Ada County, and specifically children who have a desire to build our future. Let's head over to the field district as we continue to make our way around the park. So, what's going on at the field district? At the field district, we have pathways, we have interpretive trails, informal play fields, shown with softball outlines, that could also be used as overflow if you need more formal playfield space. We have gathering spaces, ecological enhancement areas, non-programmed open space, and passive recreation. So what does that look like at our park? Here's a view of what that could look like. So again, we're going to highlight one of the user experiences. Here at the field district, I want to highlight restorative environments for improved mental health and well-being. So what is a restorative environment? It's simply landscape or space that promotes human interaction with the environment and with other humans. Green space is a restorative environment. Quiet space is a restorative environment. Water, wind, cool air. These things can be in short supply in some of our urban environments. Why would Ada County want to invest in restorative environments might be a question you have. Good mental health strengthens social fabrics. Good mental health strengthens communities, families, and a workforce. A spring of this year's study from University of Massachusetts Amherst has valued global economic burden, not of mental health problems, but of depression and anxiety at over $1 trillion US. The global workforce loses $1 trillion of earning power and production power because of depression and anxiety. Mental health affects Ada County. Positive mental health is more than just the absence of a disorder or the absence of a disability. Mental health is defined by the WHO as a state of well-being, similar to our definition, in which an individual can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively, and is able to make a contribution to their community. Green space will improve mental health. Social spaces improve mental health, and safe spaces improve mental health. The field district is all of that. So who's the end user? It's all of us. We all are under extreme pressure these days. I mean, most of us can cope with the normal stresses of our job and our life, and we can work productively and make a contribution to our community, but none of us are immune to stress and pressure. So anybody who simply needs a break from the pressure of life is the user of this space.
Great, let's walk over to the River Edge District. I think all of us as park users could have mentioned the river in some way. Our entire team spends time at the river, so we're really excited about designing spaces that we want to use. The program for this space involves the Boise River restoration, a dog park, greenbelt connection and enhancement, beach opportunities, barbecue areas, gathering space areas, interpretive trails, nature play, and river access. What does that look like in the park? We deal in the 2015 Boise River Enhancement Plan, or the BREN Plan, which involves cool, clean water, which enhances healthy fish communities, improves the water supply, provides clean, safe water for swimming and wading. It also promotes a healthy ecosystem, preserving the natural functions of the river, increased native vegetation, and that's really what we're trying to accomplish with the plan here along the edge. The user experience we want to highlight is river access. It's a place to, what is it? It's a place to play in the water, walk along the beach, wade, get access to trails. It's an easy place that you could put in or take out watercraft, which we do often around the valley. Why invest in the river access? We think it provides the trifecta of health. It's physical, mental, and environmental. It also provides great opportunities for social gathering and interaction. Much like other areas of the park, the end user is everyone. It's about inclusion.
All right. We are going to make our way to our last of the 5 districts, the Movement District. What's going on at the Movement District? Well, this district includes a really dynamic program. Bike park, pump track, cross-country running trails, fitness equipment, interactive water features, a lake with adjacent picnic areas, open fields for play, and a destination playground. So some images so you can see what the character of this space might look like. This is the bike park we did near Fort Boise, which has turned out really well. Lots of use. Fitness equipment, you can see there's a difference between a user like me that might use this image in the middle and a young, adventurous user who might use the image on the right. But I think what I want to highlight today, or our user experience that we really want to highlight, would be what is a destination playground. That's what we think is a winning idea for this project. So a destination playground is simply a large playground, and we're talking really large. This playground that we're proposing or showing the plan could be as much as 10 times, 12 times larger than what you'd see at a normal park, with a variety of activity zones. Destination playgrounds offer activity for the widest age range, going way beyond middle school age, up into high school and older, and all the way through adulthood. Truly inclusive play. And what you really want to do is create return traffic. There's so much varied activity and so much excitement and complexity that kids keep coming back. Our destination playground is the entire Movement District that we showed you earlier, with the bike park, the pump track, cross-country running trails, the fitness equipment, all of those features. But the play structure itself, when you talk playground, you're thinking of the structure. So let's talk about what makes a successful play structure. Well, integration with landform and terrain. That's key. On a flat plane, it's not as exciting. It's not as complex. Complexity and scale, that's really like large spanning area. Our structure area is shown as 3 acres on the park. So it's very complex, large scale. You can handle lots of kids of different ages. Perceived risk. So playgrounds are safe. They meet federal laws for safety, and we design them in a safe way. But children need to perceive a risk. If there's no risk, it's boring and they use it incorrectly. All right? So there's great play equipment that, especially stuff that gets you really high in the air, that creates that perceived risk for the child, and probably for the parent as well. And then creative materials are also another way to create really successful destination play. So these are some examples of that. So let's take a look at what this looks like in the park. So here's our proposed destination playground, in addition to those other activities that we described. So why would you invest in a destination playground? This is millions of dollar investment. You will attract residents from all of Ada County, all of the Treasure Valley, and beyond. You will create equity through natural Idaho recreation that's accessible. So you can do anything in this park that you can do in Idaho. You can rock climb, you can run on trails, you can mountain bike, you can paddle in the river. Everything that you could experience in Idaho. But for a child who can't get there, doesn't go to McCall on the weekend, they can walk down the street, ride their BMX, and experience those activities. We create equity because we have a safe place to play with kids that are not from your community. It's good to play with people that are not like you. Promoting healthy living, this is the kind of exercise that's fun. All right? We all put our kids on soccer teams and they love it, but this is what a kid would do if they made their own schedule for the day. And it will drive economic activity. People will drive great distance to get here. They will need to eat in this Ada County community. They will need goods and services in the Ada County community. So who's the end user? Well, it's all of Ada County's residents, because we showed wide age range, all ages, all abilities, all backgrounds. It is not uncommon, Salt Lake has a couple of these parks, it's not uncommon for people to drive 100 miles to visit a destination playground. They're that incredible.
Wow, Matt, what an incredible day at the park.
Yes.
Thanks for following our journey. The park is unrestrained, free, bold, in the enhancement of the community through health, equity, and ecology.
So when our team set out on this journey, or first we responded to the RFQ, we were really excited, surprised, excited, thrilled to get shortlisted. And we got together and we decided we wanted to create a single kind of iconic feature in the park that could really be the big idea. As our design work evolved, we ended up with, we created these 5 unique districts. And then we thought, wow, these could each stand on their own. These are parks in and of themselves. And that became very exciting. The districts can be phased over time, 1 at a time, 2 at a time. They could be all built together. They really do work in concert with one another to achieve our vision, support the guiding principles of health, equity, and ecology. So we told you what we're excited about. I actually wanted to pause, if we could, and ask the commissioners, or ask everybody up here, can we ask what feature of the park or which district you found most exciting and you would want to visit?
Yeah, so I think that large-scale playground is very intriguing. I don't have kids of age anymore, but I'd almost want to see how they react to the perceived risk. Yeah, it's a very exciting idea.
Thank you.
Well, I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm never leaving the destination playground. I'm going to stay there. I do have one quick question about the river access. How do you envision that as far as people being able to launch the boats? Is there going to be a beach area? I see it looks like a walk-down stair area to the river.
Yeah. Go ahead,
Yes,
Katrina.
yes, and, right? We stayed high level, big vision, but that's absolutely those elements that we are thinking we're going to incorporate, and several elements that you just see in other great parks along the river in addition.
Yeah, and it's so critical when you you get in a raft and the current takes you down, okay? You got to have a place to get out, a place with a parking lot, a place you can spend time when you get out. So we plan an actual takeout. My wife and I have a canoe, and if you want to really make sure you're meant to be together in a marriage, you should canoe together. And we're getting good at it. But the takeout and the launch are the big moments in life. And so this is a beach takeout with easy access, steps, ramp, really well built so that it's convenient and provides ease to exit the water area.
But to follow up with that, I'm confused. Where's the put in and where's the take out? Can you just point and what's the?
there.
That's the put in.
The green laser disappears on the screen, so I'm gonna back up. I don't know if that's much bigger. So I'm gonna point at the screen for you.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, I think that's the animal. Yeah.
That area there. And then further down, there's stairs that could take you down to the water's edge.
Is there a couple of them going east there as well? Down from that, is that what those two little white sections are there?
I'm gonna ask Christopher to help us answer that.
Yeah, so the intent with the engagement at the river was to provide multiple programmatic opportunities for people to do that and approach the river as they are most comfortable. So yes, there would be a larger takeout that has ramps for rafts and canoes and things of that nature and a beach associated with it that a larger group could go and aggregate near the river and play in the water. But then also we have more simple steps in a couple of locations that provide a more intimate connection with the water. And then also at places where we think that there's some really good views and opportunities to engage with the river in a different way, we're looking at doing more of an overlook experience at a couple of small nodes, which again is a much more intimate experience and can serve a different user group along the river frontage.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kenyon, what are you excited about? Where would you want to spend your time?
Well, this frankly concerns me a little bit just because I see what Scott Coburg deals with in the summer in the rafting season. It's a little chaotic there. I'm really interested in hearing more about the collaborative kitchen, the economic development opportunities. I'm not sure this park, I think the acreage lends itself to something this grand, but I'm a little concerned with ingress and egress. You know, Shindon and Glenwood is already, you know, the traffic is really tight there all the time. And so if this is going to be 10 times the size of any other playground, I kind of worry about congestion and what that would look like. So I'm kind of leaning more towards how does this integrate, again, into the master plan that the citizens group envisioned with some economic development, some potential value and viability with what's going on in Garden City adjacent to, and then moving in that direction.
Yeah, that's a great question. So those plans envisioned a lot of commerce occurring up against the edges of the park, right? Which would create almost a round-the-clock activation of the space, users moving through or businesses adjacent to wanting to take advantage of having a park, a borrowed landscape. Our solution, I think what our main focus was the citizens of Ada County, despite what may happen in Garden City, have a space to come to, and we really wanted to hit on health and equity, and then we have the ecology portion on the river. This will bring more users, and traffic will be busy on the streets. I don't have a solution for that for you. I drove Chinden to get here today, and I drove past, and it was already getting busy. I don't think it's ever not busy anymore. But yes, these features will certainly bring people. We'll need to use the parking spaces that are available at EXPO and overlap with them. I'm really hopeful that having Greenbelt access and a strong connection into Garden City puts a lot of people on foot. Does anybody on my team have more to add to that?
Yeah, I would just sort of teeing off of that one. You know, the thought was with developing this park and showing how it's sort of in this sequence of the Boise River and Greenbelt access, our hope is that a lot of the traffic is going to come from other modes of transportation. We have the advantage of a really large existing parking lot that if you do have a large event or you're bringing in a large group, you can utilize that. But more than likely, our hope is that either through filtering through Garden City or filtering down from the Greenbelt is how most people are accessing this site. And we can hopefully help to mitigate some of those congestion concerns on those arteries that are already sort of overburdened. In addition to that, I think another thing that's sort of plays into this idea of access and connectivity is that Matt was starting to speak to is the idea of the incubator kitchen. And if you'll recall, we broke the rules And we went a little bit outside of the actual limits of the project. And I think there's opportunities to create some synergy with some of the vacant lots around the park, especially on that Garden City east side, as the terminus of Adams Street, where you talk about that trying to be sort of their main street. We really have an opportunity to create some energy there at the park entrance. And one of those things could be sort of the incubator kitchen that's then associated with more of the programming that happens inside the park, such as community gardens or the Pioneer Orchard or some of those things that relate to the story of Garden City, but then also relate to the programming that we're proposing for the project site.
Perfect. And then I really like the movement district. And I love what you did over in the Fort Boise area with the bike park over there.
Yes.
How large is that? What was the actual acreage that you're anticipating for the entire movement district? And then what would like a bike park like that take up? How much space?
So the movement district, which is just inset from our River's Edge district, on this plan is probably as much as 20 acres if you count the playground, the lake, or the pond, which is a reuse of the existing pond, and then the bike and trail area. I'm going to ask Bob to comment on the bike park because he was integral in that project.
Yeah, the bike park space, we're looking at here, there's a lot more complexity with the Boise Bike Park because it's part of that floodway system for the entire city of Boise and the foothills and that whole drainage there. So there's a lot more complexity to that in a functionality perspective. Scale-wise, I think we're similar here, probably not quite as organized as the Boise Bike Park, and I think that was intentional with this design. We wanted the pathways to be a little bit looser, through this space here and really engage with that river's edge a little bit more. So complexity-wise, a bit simpler, but scale-wise, on par, I think, with the Boise Bike Park.
And then just follow-up question. Seasonality is important. People tend to hibernate here for about 5 months out of the year, oftentimes. What can you envision that you could add into this movement park area to get and entice and encourage people out in the winter?
That's a great question. Well, so the movement district, again, is the colorful playground area across the pond and wraps around. All of the pathways are 12-month-a-year activity. Now, it depends on how adventurous people are and if we've had a snowstorm, right? But generally, for me in Boise, almost every winter day I can get out and walk at least. So pathways are available year-round. And that's when the river's low, that's when it's dry. That area, we think, has some openings, so if there's a flood event, water can back into those spaces. We don't have a side channel concept, but we do have a back-end kind of flood mitigation availability, so we can soak up some flood water or excess water. In the winter, those areas are dry, for river water dry, they might have snow or moisture, but the pathway system would be available and open. And the dog park, I think dog park users are pretty hardy.
Pretty hardy.
And they want to be out all the time. I'd say that, really that pathway system is going to be the winner for winter use. Katrina, thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree. And I think, as we move forward to the process, if we're lucky to be partnered with you guys, those are the kind of exciting ideas and comments that we hope to address.
Thank you.
Thanks. Commissioner Beck, what do you think? Is there a spot you're dying to visit now?
Oh, I'd like to visit the whole thing, but I am intrigued by some of the areas. The perceived risk looked to me like quite a bit of risk. Maybe I'm just looking at the pictures, but you had that walkway like way up high. That looked like a little bit risky area there. I don't
He's
know.
afraid to go on the sky ride.
Yeah. No, it seemed really, and of course the kitchen. How do you perceive the kitchen would be managed? I don't quite get that myself.
Yeah, that's a good question. There's different models for how kitchen incubators are managed. And we haven't done one. I've researched it, I've read about it. I think it's an amazing idea. I have a cousin who makes crackers. She got a master's degree in mechanical engineering, quit engineering, rented space in a commercial kitchen, makes crackers, sells them in specialty food shops, wine tastings, things like that. It's her whole living. And I'm her cousin, so I've ordered these crackers and paid the shipping from Boulder too. But how's it managed? I think there's different models. We'd need to look into that more clearly because it's going to take an investment. If you read on kitchen incubators, very few of them break even. Okay, it is a supplemented activity in order to drive the kind of down the line success of food entrepreneurs. It is, if you create one that charges full rate, and then it becomes the barrier just like any other kitchen. So the management of it, that is an excellent question and something we really have to dig in on, especially with your people who would be charged with that management.
Well, that's why I asked the question.
Yeah.
I mean, that is what, the other item that was intriguing to me was in your pictures, you had some food trucks along, and do you envision something a little bit like Green Acres here?
Absolutely. I think the opportunity for food truck parks and what happens in Green Acres and how successful that has proven to be, that can be emulated. There's enough distance between that facility and this location. We could absolutely do the same thing. You've been there? to Green
Yeah, I
Acres?
ride my bike down the Greenbelt to get there. And so, I think that Matt's absolutely correct. I think that this is far enough away, and that's an exciting opportunity for all the citizens, whether you're walking or biking or you've just had a dang long day at the park and you need to get some refreshment. So,
And that's a pretty low investment, right? They need a place to park. And if you can provide a little bit of shade and some seating areas, you've got a food truck park. Zoning matters, right? Because it's a specific type of use, but that can be overcome. That's not impossible. That's just go through the process kind of a thing. I think that's low hanging fruit. That's a good one to go for right away.
Okay, well, I would particularly be interested in management of that kitchen, because you don't build a big kitchen and just, okay, show up. There's got to be some management behind it. You got to, anyway, it is an intriguing idea.
Thank you. Commissioner Davidson.
Well, I do like the idea of a destination playground because, I do like the idea of us having something that nobody else has. The park I go to the most is the White River Park and Esther Simplot. And I think their playground is a little underwhelming. Are you pretty familiar with all the design elements at Esther Simplot Park?
Yes.
One thing I noticed is I think maybe some designers who design that possibly sacrifice some play elements for an aesthetic that's more appealing to adults than kids. For instance, they got all these large, tall, colorful poles that don't seem to be any purpose other than just they look neat. But for kids, I don't think they're that impressive. And they have a couple of slides that are carved into kind of boulders. And so it looks neat. There's boulders everywhere around these slides, but it's not the safest thing for kids to be running up and down on boulders. But I think it looks cool to adults. So my question is, what is your design sensibility, and do you think you can, more appropriately design a park for kids, not something that just adults will think looks neat?
Yeah, good question. So you got 6 designers up here. We're all going to have our own kind of style, probably. Bob did the Discovery Park, the newest Meridian Park playground. I worked on Settlers, did a lot of that one. Christopher's done park design. 2 winning things for kids: water and risk. And when if you design for parents, you're not going to have either. Because as a parent, I don't want either of it, right? It's like, oh my gosh. My kids are grown now, but I have not forgotten what it's like to try to manage a child at a playground. But at the end of the day, if the kid plays hard all day and falls asleep on the way home, I think you've got a winning playground. If you integrate water play and perceived risk, that's going to be a winner for the kids. So that's how we would approach it. What that really looks like, we try to depict it in this graphic, which does look pretty risky. But those kids are safe. That's a fully enclosed bridge. Trust us. You can do these things. This is absolutely possible to create that playground right there. You can have rock climbing, you can have ground play elements, you've got water play happening, and you've got this big risk feature. It's 100% possible, and you can do it. And if you have that, kids are going to want to be there. And as a parent, I know it's risky, but when the kids having fun and begging to go out and play at the park rather than for their Xbox, I think you'd get parents on board as well. The Discovery Park, I don't know if you've been to Discovery Park. This is an image in the upper right, and this was Bob's project. Do you want to talk about this, Bob, about why do you think this is so full of kids right here?
Yeah, I think Matt nailed it, right? It's water and it's a little bit of risk, right? But it's giving the kids opportunities to get dirty, right? Get out there, go play, get dirty, explore. And I think that concept blends right into this idea for the park at EXPO, is that we want to create a destination playground that blends in with that setting and tells that story of Idaho. So you have the rock climbing, you have the water play, you have the adventure, right? And that aesthetic would blend right in with that overall dynamic and concept for the park itself. So this image here, that was a particularly popular day at Discovery Park, right? But we have the kids doing all of those things, playing in the water, playing on the rock wall. In the backside of this image is the playground, the play structure, the more traditional play structure. And all of that space is being used by the kids. Plenty of activity around for the parents as well, right? Shade for the parents, opportunities for concessions, that sort of thing. So you bring all those components together, I think that you have a winning formula.
And then what do you think about the river recreation aspects, connectivity to the other parks on the river? What kind of recreation are you thinking on the river? Because, if the river's flowing, you really can go only one way.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, river, okay, my first thought is, I'm a pretty fortunate guy. I'm going to McCall Friday, and I'm going to paddle up the meanders, the north end of the lake. There are a lot of people in this valley this county that don't get to do that, okay? So I want to create a space where they go and they experience, and they feel like they're from the same Idaho I'm from. So that's equity, right? So that's river access. I think we can successfully create this feeling of this lower left image. We can create that kind of splash, play, edge situation. That's lower maintenance, lower management, because it's trash collection, it's those kind of things. It's like Eagle Island State Park, it's like Lucky Peak. Those are pretty good. In a boat, it's a whole different animal. You already have that. You launch at Barber Park. I think you guys run the shuttle back up, or you contract that. I don't know how you do that exactly. This is an extension. This gets us further downriver. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it could be something that we explore further. You're absolutely right. Generally, it goes one way. On my paddleboard, I like to get up beyond Lucky Peak or on the river there, and I float down, and then I have to paddle back up, right? Because there's a dam there. So it's possible, it's doable, and I think that's one of those things that we're excited about to explore is how can we access this part of the river, and what does that look like? Is it watercraft? Maybe it's not in this instance, but we think it can be.
Yeah. I think in the years to come, extending what Boise City has within Ada County further west down the river because of the added people and pressures on the water is it's going to be an important piece of the puzzle. And there's a lot of river in Ada County, and it's probably only got user access half of it or a third of it. So that extension, this is the first part of that extension to the west.
Can you go back to the slide that shows the entire park, please? So in the very right-hand corner up there, there's a vacant parking lot. I see some design work in there. What do you have in there? Very top right-hand corner. All work goes right
Potential
through
for
there.
future commercial development. And that's the partnership and the agency communication that we would have to work through. You know, we've mentioned, why is the edge, right? It is because of land, but eventually that's going to develop. So can we partner in that same vein to make it a great adjacent use for the park?
So as you get into the big park, is the parking all that white space? It doesn't seem like there's a lot of parking for the park size that you have.
Right, good question. So you can just see on the bottom edge of the screen the large existing parking of EXPO Idaho, right? So that's there if there's not a competing event or activity. Parking around the turf club and the grandstand, that's an existing lot. Is that correct? Yeah, that's existing. We are adding some parking as you move up toward the community district, the kitchen incubator. And then we're showing added parking all along the east edge of the playground, the top of the screen, edge of the playground.
Do you anticipate how many cars you have in that for parking?
Did we do a count, team, on
Probably
that?
did
A
do
traffic
count.
count, but the intent there again is,
But it just doesn't seem like there's a lot of parking for the size of what you're asking the people to come and do.
yeah, so to try and keep the parking around the perimeter, to try and keep the core more pedestrian oriented. And the hope is that we'd either be able to leverage alternative modes of transportation to get people there, and then have some supplemental parking that gets them closer to some of the key destinations. And then for larger events or when additional parking is needed, utilizing more of the existing parking that's associated with the fairgrounds.
Yeah.
So
And it,
also looking at the parking where you potentially have the off-ramp for into the river, and there's no parking around there either. And that dragging your canoes and rafts and everything, that seems like quite a ways to get in and out of the water.
yeah, that's fair. And it's a county park. Not everybody lives within walking distance, bicycle distance of this. So parking is a reality at a county-wide park facility. I agree with Christopher. We wanted to show that we're anticipating parking on the edges. We'd rather keep parking to the edges if possible. And for this vision, is it under park? It could be. That could be a fair comment.
I just live with a lot of parking. That's one thing we have is a lot of parking, and everybody has it. And then when you start condensing it and adding amenities to that, that can be problematic. I have been in this business a while, and I have seen the kitchen incubators, and they are a challenge, both renting, cleaning, repairing, and that brings me to the big park. What would you anticipate the operating and maintenance of something like that would be? Did you have any idea?
Of the full park space?
The primary where you have all the kids and the high risk and all that other stuff in there.
Well, I mean, you can have maintenance that you're used to. When people come, there's garbage. I mean, that's the first thing, right? But the maintenance of the equipment itself, the surfaces, those kind of things, those are regular checking. You got to keep an eye on things. Do you own playgrounds right now? Playground equipment, structures? So the maintenance on the equipment, the structure itself, I'd say is low. They're checking it maybe monthly and yearly for loose bolts, loose equipment, for areas, head entrapment, snags, things like that. Okay, you're checking it. Repair is seldom. It ages out over time. Ground surface, you're checking it probably on a similar schedule, monthly, yearly. But you're going to have to, no matter what surface you put on the ground plane, synthetic turf, rubber, all that stuff, it has a lifespan. It will need replacement at some time. The life of those systems changes, but like synthetic turf, we think we can get 10 years out of that. It's warranted for 8. People are getting 10 out of that. The rubberized, I think, lasts less. Bob, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's about right. Yeah.
Because Meridian has not loved the rubberized at Settlers, but they've maintained it, and you go and it looks almost intentional, but there's circles cut out of it. Those are repairs. So they're repairing it on an as-needed basis, and that's 20 years or so in. So ground plane, You got to maintain your equipment. Water play, it takes a lot of maintenance. That's every day. That's hour by hour. Every day it's operational.
Yep. And you have some of those features in your plan?
We do.
Okay.
We do.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, congratulations. Nice job on the presentation on getting to this point. I think you
Yeah.
did a really nice job here. I like that you were excited about the 5 districts within the one park. I think that's exciting. As far as me and what I'm excited about is honestly a couple of things that you sort of hit on but didn't dive a little bit deeper into. One is the turf club conversion into a youth center and what that might look like, how that would serve the visitors to the park. And in your introduction, you really talked about the absorption of the history and culture of the area or the valley, indigenous peoples, the Chinese population. I'm really curious to hear a little bit more about how this park concept would do that.
That's a great question. I love that. Because Katrina and I have been meeting to prep for this, and we've been talking about those specific things. So let's start the Learning Center. There are examples of these around too. And Boys and Girls Club provides a similar type opportunity. It's not as targeted because kids come and have free time basically after school. But the Learning Center, one, we think when you have a building, if you can reuse it, that's the cheapest, most eco-friendly building you can ever construct, right? It's already there.
Yep.
And that can be converted into classroom type spaces. I guess our focus in this presentation was STEAM education for kids, summer and after school. So targeted. I mean, just simply the fact that Micron's building the new fab and they're going to need 2,000 highly skilled employees, in the years to come. They're ready to make an investment in education in this state, in this valley. And thinking it could start that young, I think is very exciting. But it's really space. We think it's space. And then
Flexible space.
And then hopefully, I think we could look at partners. Like, does 4-H provide STEAM education opportunities? Are they needing space to do that for kids? Are there opportunities for other partnering activities where you have a space, other people come in and provide content and programming? I think that's where you could, if that is possible, that's where you could really leverage that space nicely.
I think that part of it is wise, I think, just because of the history of that site, given the fairgrounds and agriculture in particular. I think, that was what was intriguing about the food incubator, or the kitchen incubator, plus the gardens too, is that you're integrating an agricultural component to a site. And 4-H, what can you say about the indigenous and cultural and historic kind of background introduction and how it relates to what you would do at this park to highlight those things?
Yeah. What do you think?
Well, we talked about, not appropriating culture, so being sensitive to that. And we mentioned interpretive trails in a couple of different spots. That could occur in those areas. What are on those boards? What are you learning as you're walking through the park? I think that those are your opportunities to explain context, explain history, but do it in a really natural way that makes sense for the park and for the users without just doing that cultural appropriation.
Yeah, okay, so an example. So we do not want a teepee in our playground. Like, we don't, but is that appropriate? Maybe, if you have a theming, but we don't think the cultural representation is through themed built elements. We think it's through education, learning, opportunities. So one example, outside of Denver, there's a program, they have a gathering garden. So they've worked with their indigenous tribes to create a garden, and then they run programs where you can come and learn how to gather seeds, roots, use the plants like the indigenous people would have used in historic times. So that, to me, that's the concept. That's how you pull that culture into this space. Or a pioneer orchard where the community can come and pick fruit and use it. And maybe you can get heritage apple, apricot. My grandfather homesteaded in Rupert, and the University of Idaho sent him like 1,000 tree plugs. They put them all in the ground, and he had every fruit tree you can imagine in the middle of the desert in Rupert. So I think there's that kind of that pioneer spirit that you pull that culture in. You know, the enterprise of the Chinese businessmen, business people, I think really comes through in the incubator kitchen. So those are the concepts we're trying to pull in.
Commissioners and evaluators, I think we've come to that time. Wrap up. So any final comments before we head out?
We just want to thank you guys for letting us be part of this. This competition has really let us dive into this area. We obviously would be so honored to be partners with this team if it comes to that. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Good job.
And group. Commissioners, evaluators, you guys need a little break?
Yes,
All right,
please.
let's break for about 5 minutes and come on back. final presentation from Port. And we'll get them started now. So if you guys could take your seats. All right, Port, time is yours.
Thank you. So hopefully last but not least, my name is Christopher Marcinkowski. I'm a partner with Port. We're a landscape architecture and urban design practice based in Philadelphia and Chicago. I'm lucky enough to be joined today by my colleagues, Anna Darling and Nick Jabs, as well as our collaborator from Marlin Blackwell Architects, Justin Hirschberger, and our local civil engineer, NV5, Bonnie Layton. Interestingly enough, NV5's Philadelphia office is 3 floors below ours in Philly, so we have a connection there right off the bat. You've heard it now twice from the previous projects. This is a generational opportunity. This is an amazing site, an amazing chance, investment that is here, and we have had an enormous amount of fun over the last 7.5 weeks thinking about this project, thinking about what could happen here on the EXPO site, and hopefully we'll have the chance to continue to work with you all going forward on this project. One sort of other note is just to congratulate the other two teams. It's really inspiring to get to look at the work of others, thinking about the same project, the same problem for such a long period of time. So it's exciting to actually be in the room during one of these interviews. Oftentimes you don't get to see what your other competitors are doing. So I'm going to start, before we dive into the project, with a little bit of an acknowledgement. We're not from around here. We're from someplace else. You can probably tell that already. But we are a practice and we are a team that's committed to knowing a place and knowing a people. So whether it's working with small rural communities in western Pennsylvania in the kind of Appalachian Mountains, whether that's working with the Regional Plan Association of New York and thinking about how one can conserve land in New Jersey and Connecticut, in the biggest metropolitan area in the United States, thinking about public space and connectivity in suburban Baltimore, or in places like Knoxville, Tennessee, where we've been working for the last 8 years on a variety of projects where we're learning about the landscape, we're learning about the people, we're collaborating with the people to create new landscapes of public occupation and public space. And so it's this kind of commitment to getting to know a place and its people that I think is at the center of the way that Port works. I know it's at the center of the way Marlin Blackwell's office works, and is really at the center of our entire team's ethos in terms of how we approach a project like this. Another context that we've had the opportunity to work in over the past few years is Bentonville, Arkansas, with the Walton Family Foundation and their Design Excellence Program. And so what's interesting about Bentonville and interesting about Knoxville in particular is how similar they are to Boise. They are cities that are growing. They are cities that are set in landscapes, natural landscapes that are spectacular. And in a lot of ways, those natural landscapes are so much better than any park could ever be created. But what we're asked to do is think about those public spaces that are transitions between the city and those natural landscapes. And so in a lot of ways, there's some commonalities there, but obviously Boise is different and Boise is distinct. We've worked across the country, as I pointed out, as has Marlin's office, as has Great Ecology, who is a central team member with us, unable to be here today, but based out of San Diego, bringing a kind of expertise in sort of environmental design, as well as Pros Consulting. And Pros, we actually can't get on the map because they've worked in 45 states on over 1,000 projects, park projects, municipal-based park projects. There's a level of expertise here that we think is really substantial and really significant. But it's a level of expertise that comes with a commitment to the people in the place. And it comes to it with a commitment to work with you all in creating this sort of wonderful opportunity for the people of Ada County and the Boise region. What that means is that we're going to be here. We've had the chance to be here for a few days in August. We've had a chance to be here for a few days this week. We look forward to being here a lot and being here for a long time. Knoxville is a perfect example of that. 8 years we've been involved in projects. Started with a project for a foundation, then with the city, then with the highway department, with another foundation, now again with the city. We like to be invested in the places that we work, even if we're not from those places. What that means is that we can deliver projects that are unique, that are distinct, but that are specific to the locale and the people that we're working with. All that said, we are committed to building out the remainder of our project team with local and regionally based consultants. This is an ARPA grant. It's about economic development. It's about resilience of the community and the economy of the region. Therefore, we are committed to adding to this core team of 5 consultants and sub-consultants who can support our work and are based here in the Boise region. We think that's super important. Now to the fun part. That was the preamble, I guess, if you will. You all didn't give us a whole lot of direction with regard to what to do on this site. You asked for a park. And so what we would like to do at the beginning is just sort of go over what we understand as the context and as the kind of opportunity here to give you a sense of how we're thinking about this project. One of the things that stands out for us in thinking about the Expo site, Boise in general, this area of Idaho, Treasure Valley, is that it's a collection of contrasts, whether it's the river and the range, whether it's the seasonality of wetness and dryness and how radically different those can be. Garden City's name in and of itself is a kind of contrast, the kind of agricultural heritage to the sort of auto-centric mid-century development to the kind of densification that's going on today. It's hot here. It was 105, I think, when we visited in August. It also gets pretty cold. And so this park needs to acknowledge and embrace both of those conditions. It's next to an expo. An expo is a place of sound and light and noise and enthusiasm. Parks sometimes can be passive, right? They can be quiet. They can be contemplative. So how do we think about those contrasts really in dialogue with one another? It's also a place that's for both locals, the nearby community, the Boise region, Treasure Valley region, but also tourism and visitors. Those audiences have different expectations, they have different demands, but they're all end users of this project and things that we want to consider as we approach this park. This is also something that's part of an amazing network, an amazing system, chain of parks along the Boise River, which we've heard spoken about today, and that we are able to tap into and add to in terms of this project. It's sort of advantageously positioned so that the growth of the metropolitan region to the west, this allows that park system to extend further, to connect with Eagle and some of these other communities that are nearby to really sort of enhance and optimize that chain of public space. The site itself, I think, is really interesting, right? It's a place that people know in the kind of public imagination for events and for entertainment. It's not necessarily the place that you think about for passive recreation or for nature, but there is an opportunity there. Garden City in and of itself is fascinating as a kind of story of a community that has its own sensibility, its own distinct sense of place, whether that's the kind of the origin story of Garden City or the kind of arts and creative practices that are there today. These are qualities that we would want to build on and that we have tried to build on in our project. This park is also the centerpiece of a larger transformation. There's a huge amount of investment going into Garden City. There's an enormous amount of transformation of the community that's ongoing. And this park has the opportunity not only to be a kind of orienting device for that development, but also potentially inflect it in ways that the county and the community want to see happen. And so whether it's the ULI plan or individual proposals, understanding this park as part of a much larger context of urbanism and ongoing transformation is central to our approach. So what's that all mean? What does that mean for a park on the EXPO Idaho site? Given the quality of public space that exists in Boise, one could say, why not just recreate what we already have? Why not just build another Esther Simplot Park, which is an amazing, amazing amenity and amazing, amazing resource? Well, we think there's a great deal that we can learn from the existing system. We actually see this as an opportunity to set a precedent, an opportunity to create public space on the Boise River that is unlike any other public space that exists in the region. We can do this not by blowing the budget and not by spending hundreds of millions of dollars that you don't have. We can do this with the resources that you do have in terms of thoughtfully considering how program and landscape are integrated in this project. We think of this in a really simple way. Designing a park for today, a park for tomorrow, and a park for the future. And as we go through this, hopefully it'll come through how we are thinking about these different timescales in terms of the project that we'd like to put forward. This is a view of what we imagine as that park. Here is a sort of site plan of how that fits into a larger context. You'll notice we've drawn a little bit more than our park boundary. We've drawn the idea of potential future development. We've drawn the idea of the river corridor and the kind of enhancements along it. And we've started to think about the way that this park site can actually be integrated into the expo, integrated into the fabric of Garden City, not treated as an island, but as something that's truly woven together and starts to attract and bring together communities and people and activity. The park can be understood as two major components. There's what we call the heart of the park. This is a 25-acre zone that sits along the western and southern edge that's really about intensive recreation. It's about super active spaces that are immediately adjacent to what we are anticipating being areas of new development and what's immediately adjacent to the Expo site. The other 60-plus acres are what we're calling the lowlands, or the lower landscape, which is really about the creation of a natural set of landscapes that are enormous ecological and biodiversity value. So bringing biodiversity into the city in a way that does not currently exist, into the region in a way that doesn't currently exist. So we'll start with the heart of the park. This is an area that can be divided into sort of two lobes or two loops, the north loop and the south loop. The North Loop is all about sport. It's all about fitness, it's about courts, but it's also about education and event. It's ringed by a 3/4 mile running surface and is anchored by a transformation or a renovation of the existing grandstand. That grandstand, and Justin will talk more about this later, is a kind of public recreation facility that allows for sport to be had, kind of a community center, if you will, but also a place to survey and overlook the various activities of the park. Immediately adjacent to it is a pump track, kind of competition scale pump track, and to the south, a collection of sports courts and active surfaces for pickleball, basketball, volleyball, tennis. In some ways, we can reconfigure those and reshape those. This is about sort of test fitting what's possible there. One of the things that we've done in this location is that we've actually configured it based upon the current parking lot so that we can limit excavation, grind that surface down, and put those sports fields right back on top of it to limit the kind of investment dollars that we would be putting in that location. The blue is not a pandering to the Boise State turf. The blue is actually about a surfacing of those courts that is solar reflective, which allows for anywhere from 8 to 12 degrees lower temperature on those activities, which we think is really important given the weather here. You'll notice to the south that there is a kind of entry grove, and then I have the pleasure of sort of pointing out here that there's a moment here where we actually slip beyond the bounds of our site boundary. And we start to think about a kind of large event lawn that crosses over into the Expo site in front of Western Town and is anchored then by a project or a facility that we're calling the Exploration Center. And so if the renovated grandstand is all about sport and activity with a little bit of restaurant and retail tucked into it, the Exploration Center is all about partnerships. It's about the story of conservation, it's about the story of agricultural heritage, it's about the exhibition of art and creative practices from the surrounding community. And so although it becomes a kind of shared facility between the Expo and the park, it serves to activate this area of the north loop of the heart of the park. And so just a few images of what that starts to feel like. There's a kind of vibrancy and a sort of intensive set of activities here around the courts and around the running track. There's the opportunity to start to think about this both year-round and during the day and in the evening. So the grandstand starts to become a kind of lantern. One could imagine starting to flood the loop in certain areas so that you can skate along it. And then this opportunity to take the Great Lawn and the Exploration Center as a kind of linkage between the activity of the Expo and the activities of the park along this edge. To the south of this is, as you've heard, Destination Play. I think one of the interesting things about going third is that you start to see ideas come forward a couple of times. And so you've heard this one a few, so it's probably a good idea to pursue to some level. For us, Destination Play is about splashing, it's about adventure, and it's about nature. And it's positioned really at the kind of gateway to the park. The southeast corner. And the reason that we did this is very much in thinking about how do we attract the broadest set of users and audiences to this place. And so for us, for us, play is not just about kids, it's about intergenerational activity. It's about grandparents bringing their grandchildren, it's about aunts and uncles bringing their nieces and nephews, it's about young and old playing together and socializing together. And as you can see, there's a kind of mix of opportunities here, whether it's the kind of tribune seating and community stage, a spray ground, more formal structured parking, and then as we move out into the lower landscape, a kind of adventure playground that has more natural features and character to it in that area. And so, one of the things that we've had the opportunity to do in our projects elsewhere is work with some really amazing play consultants, one of which is actually based in Philadelphia with us, who has done the largest study of playgrounds in the United States. It was just completed, funded by the National Science Foundation. And nature-based play is something that she has found again and again is a driver of both park user as well as economic development, as was pointed out earlier today. That idea of bringing nature into play is really essential. And thinking about that play year-round, not just in the summer months, not just in the fall, but in that first day of February where you get the 60-degree temperatures and everybody wants to get out. Most designers don't show you views of the worst season of the year when all the trees are dead and all the things are sort of in the background. But we think this is a place that could be animated year-round in terms of that intensity of play activity. To the south, we have what we're calling the South Loop, which is really about wheels and fields, for lack of a better description. So here we're showing a kind of collection of baseball fields, Little League fields, as well as a multi-use turf field and a practice area. You see the destination playground in the corner. And at the other end, another sort of destination amenity that we're calling the Wheel Sports Garden. This is a typology that's becoming more and more in demand in many cities. It's not just a skate park, it's actually a park facility that's designed for people on rollerblades, on scooters, on BMX. It's all wheels that don't use any that are human powered, don't have any motorized backing to them. And it becomes this really active animated space because it's a much broader user group than just the skateboarders. And it allows for a certain connection in that corner with the adjacent Garden City community. It becomes a kind of gateway at that edge of the park. You see the sports fields, again, sort of centered between the two aspects of play on either side. And then these are really wrapped by another kind of circuit or another sort of loop. In this case, less one about speed and racing as you might have in the northern loop, but much more about strolling and rolling at a kind of slower pace, a more casual pace, with the opportunity for trailheads and other kind of connections down into that lower landscape. You see the Exploration Center beyond and the renovated grandstand as well. And so when you look at this, one of the things that you note about the heart of the park is that in these 25 acres, there's a whole lot of stuff going on. There's a whole intensive body of programs and bodies of activities. And in many ways, this is the project that we know that we can deliver in the 4 years required by the ARPA grant. This gives the community of Garden City and this gives Ada County a project that can stand on its own and fully fulfill the expectations of play and recreation that are behind that funding mechanism. This piece of the project is anchored by a set of destinations, by the Wheel Sports Garden, by the playground, by the grandstand, and by the Exploration Center. And those destinations are not just about drawing people to this place, but creating gateways out to the surrounding areas that we want to connect to. So whether that's connecting to the expo grounds from the Exploration Center, connecting to the community from the Wheel Sports Garden, connecting to the new development through the destination playground, or connecting to the green belt and the region through the various trail systems, this becomes a kind of anchor to the larger park transformation. And so there's another 60 or so acres that I want to talk about, but in a moment I just want to sort of pause, turn it over to Justin to talk a little bit more about the kind of architectural components that are anchoring the heart of the park piece that I've just gone through.
Thank you, Chris. So Justin with Marlon Buckle Architects, I'm going to just talk to you a little bit about the buildings like Chris mentioned, and also talk to you a little bit about us. So one of the things that we like to say at our firm is that architecture is really not just about buildings. It's about the connection between buildings and site and the resonance between those two things. And I think that's part of the ethos that Port has as well, and which has made this such a great collaborative effort over the last 7.5 weeks. And so there's that connection that Chris was talking about beyond the site, but also within the site at each building, right? So there's the connection of gathering at the little pavilion next to the Wheels Play Garden. At the arrival, there's connections with the pavilions and the shade pavilion over the pickleball courts, views at the renovated grandstand, creating thresholds at the Exploration Center, and a little wayfinding piece that we'll get into a little bit later. A little bit more about us. We also like to think about architecture as creating resonance between nature-made and culture-made influences and kind of working between these two influences to kind of bring out the sense of place wherever we work around the country and internationally. So whether that's looking at honeycomb and transforming that into a system for a wall and a beekeeper's pavilion that you can store little jars of honey in. Or looking at a leaf that's eaten away by some bugs found on the site in Indianapolis that became the Ruth Lilly Visitor Pavilion at the 100-acre Art and Nature Park. And then also looking at cultural references, so looking at the references of quilts made by the women of Gee's Bend in Alabama and how that patterning can be transformed into the facade system of a polychromatic terracotta at an early childhood education center in Detroit. And then also a little bit closer to home, looking at the cultural influence of grain elevators and other agricultural infrastructure around our area in Northwest Arkansas and how that can be related to the Tower House, a 7-story guest house for a client in the heart of Fayetteville that rises above the tree line. But below the tree line, referencing back to the bark, the nature-made references of the bark for a little screen that wraps the stair up to the house. So how might we use this idea of working between culture-made and nature-made influences here? First of all, I would say we've started this process. We've started looking, and I think we have a long way to go in terms of understanding fully and immersing ourselves into the place. But what we'd really look at are the local conditions, right? The art scene, the history of the place, looking at the natural flows around Treasure Valley, around the site more proper, and also the circulation paths in and out of the site. And obviously investing ourselves into the community and understanding the community of Garden City, Boise, and the broader region, and understanding what the use needs to be for these specific people and the different groups. Obviously, we're blessed with a dramatic view of the ridge from the grandstand. How might we take advantage of that? And then also understanding the scales of landscape, so both intimate views of landscape and also the broader views that you get in the Idaho landscape. So like Chris said, we have several different programs here that we're proposing. So as we're thinking about this, we break it down into 3 different program types. So they're the public provisions, the restrooms, the kiosks that you need just to have large groups of people here. But also looking at different park amenities, shade structures, the wayfinding tower, and then public attractors, the exploration center and the renovated grandstand. Within the latter 2 specifically, we're looking at different scales of programs. So understanding that there's a lot of opportunity for revenue generating and giving those people, those potential partners to come in and utilize different scales of space within the renovated grandstand and exploration center. Further design strategies about understanding the history of the site, right? And kind of leaning into that, not shying away. So understanding that there might be a transformation coming for the grandstand and abstraction of the existing stable buildings which offer shade and abstracting that into the design of shade pavilions and maybe even the rhythm and the landscape of those structures. And then of course translation, right? Translation of the existing towers that are at the end of each straightaway of the racetrack and how those might become wayfinding elements again in the site. And history of place, right? Driving around, digging into the place, we see all these beautiful billboards, right? And how might we capture that vibe within the architecture that we're actually producing in the place? I'm going to turn it back over to Chris.
So, I mean, one of the things that I hope starts to come across for us is that the site boundary is not the kind of limit of how one needs to understand the sort of potential for success of this place, but also the potential of failure for it. That we have to think in larger contexts. And for us as a practice that's both urban design and landscape architecture, the kind of urbanism of the park is really central. So, thinking about the kind of multiple connections to the greenbelt, 2 shown in this diagram, a finer grain circulation diagram will show an additional 2 later on. Thinking about the possibility of creating a new main street for Garden City by extending the Adams Streets corridor up and through the Expo site. Thinking about how that complete street with green stormwater infrastructure and parallel parking and tree canopy and protected bike lane and all of those things for pedestrian provisions can begin to guide investment in this area and start to transform the relationship between the Expo and the kind of surrounding context. Thinking about where transit might start to serve so we don't have to rely on cars to get to this site. We can come on bike or we can come on scooter, we can come on bus or other modalities. But really these kind of larger considerations are central to our approach. But perhaps no other larger consideration is more central than the kind of ecological consideration. And that's a word that gets thrown around a lot, but that we wanted to really sort of center in our approach to this park, and in particular to the space of the lower landscape. And so if we come back to this idea of contrast, of the river and the range, these are sort of images that exist in the public imagination of Boise, certainly exist in the imagination of those of us who have not visited the city. But there's all these other landscapes that are out there. The creekside scrub, the wet meadow, the upland forest, the dry meadow. And what's important about these is their biodiversity. It's about the life that they bring in terms of the ecology of the region. The flora, the fauna, the pollinators, the sort of qualities that we lose oftentimes in a kind of urbanistic transformation. And so rather than thinking about the lower landscape as this kind of singular zone of turf grass or of a kind of single monoculture of plant material, we'd prefer to think of it as a kind of diversity of 8 different landscapes, that range in terms of their wetness and their dryness, that acknowledge the seasonality of Boise, that acknowledge the changing temperatures, the changing precipitation, and actually respond to that transformation in time. That this is a landscape that would be built over decades, perhaps, and not just built from day one. This is not a landscape that we could produce for year 5, but is a landscape that we could produce over a much longer term. And so that transformation of an existing site to a future site is one that's very much about process. It's very much about operations, and it's very much about a different attitude towards public space within the Boise region, but not an attitude that's impossible to achieve. It's actually quite possible to achieve. So for us, that transformation begins with a simple consideration of water. If you heard today, the water is very central to the identity of the site. If you look back to the 1950s, what you realize is over half the site used to be part of the Braid. It was part of the Boise River before it was sort of moved around and filled in. And what that suggests is that the flooding that takes place on the site is a natural condition. It's not something that is new. It's actually something that's going back to a condition that was very, very old. However, we've worked with the Army Corps of Engineers. We've worked with permitting agencies. We know how long it takes to modify a river. We aren't going to do that in 4 years. It's impossible. So we don't even want to try. We'd rather think about the water coming from the other direction. Thinking about the water that's coming from the new development and runoff, the water that's coming through the EXPO site, the water that's in the channels that were lost and filled in, and starting to think about the way that we can use that water as a way to create an idea of these braids or an experience of these braids that uses water on site in the ground and flowing into it as a way to conceptually connect to the river, but not necessarily tap into it in a direct way. That corridor, that sort of series of lines that you see on the map here, take on a variety of different forms. In some places, they're wide and they're flat. In other places, they're deep and they're narrow. In some places, they're intended to slow the water down. In other places, they're intended to speed the water up. The whole purpose of that is to clean the water, to cleanse the water, as well as to create areas of habitat and biodiversity within this landscape, so that you don't get a kind of singular condition, but you get a wide range of legibilities of plant material, of color, of texture, of wetness, of dryness, and that landscape changes and evolves over time. The way that we build those channels has a certain material quality to them as well. Whether it's the weir walls or the kind of play channels, there's an opportunity here to bring a sort of texture of the landscape that exists beyond Boise into this park. It's not a replication, we can never compete with it, but we can bring qualities of it into this place. So you see that kind of diversity of landscape types that gets set in there against that 25 acres of the heart of the park. And you can imagine a park now that has so many different experiences available to it, that every time you come here, you can view the park and experience the park in a radically different way. And again, that's all part of a much larger transformation. That's a sort of shift both in terms of Garden City, but also the Boise region in terms of how we're thinking about the relationship between urbanity and nature. Just as an example, these are kind of prototypical conditions of how we might begin to think about that process. So you look at the existing site, it's highly compact, it's denuded, it's got poor soil quality, and by simple activities of cutting, decompacting, amending, and planting, we can start to change that. We can start to transform that landscape of the the interior of the park, the racetrack loop, into something that is more productive and more diverse. So as the soil stabilizes and the flood capacity gets increased, you also start to see more flora and fauna begin to grow and to come in. And so there's an opportunity for nature-based recreation. There's an opportunity for citizen science. There's an opportunity for a diversity of experiences beyond what might be available in the current park network along the Boise River. So we're adding to that. We're creating new opportunities for outdoor experience, new opportunities for connection to these landscapes that are very much of the place. They're about the biodiversity and the habitat of Treasure Valley, but they're in an urban setting in an intentionally constructed way. If we think about the pond that's there now, beginning to sort of figure out how to clean the water, how to improve the soil balance, again, cutting back, decompacting, amending it, planting in strategic ways, that starts to create the opportunity for gradients of wetness. It's not just dry in a pond, but it's actually wet meadow and other sort of conditions as you move away from the channels or move away from the bodies of water. And again, opportunities for birding, opportunities for education start to become incorporated into this experience of the park, in addition to the more active uses that might be available on the edge. And again, this is a transformation that will take time. It's not going to look like this on year 5. It probably won't look like this on year 10, but it'll be getting closer to it. It certainly will begin to look like this as we move into a sort of second decade of park transformation. And that's actually exciting because that allows people who come to this park to see it, to experience, to witness that transformation in a way that registers in their mind. They can remember where the water was 2 years ago. They can remember the butterfly that they saw with their grandchild, in the spring one year. And that transformation starts to become central to the identity of the place, and starts to become an opportunity, as I said, for recreation and education, for science and play, all in the same space. The opportunity to bring biodiversity into the city cannot be overstated in terms of the value that it brings. And what we have here is a chance to create a lot of different habitats in a relatively confined site. 88 acres is a lot of room, and we can do a lot of stuff in that 88 acres, but the more interesting opportunity is to think about where future development of public space along the river corridor happens, whether or not we can set a precedent for that biodiversity through this project, through this park. So very much about habitat creation and nature recreation. We're not just trying to renaturalize it to make it look natural. We're trying to renaturalize it in order to create a sense of stewardship for the land that I think we all know is essential to the kind of success of the city, success of our sort of society as we move forward into the future. So that natural landscape gets embedded with program, with bird blinds, with trailheads, with wetland areas, play areas within the creek. And part of this is a strategy of operations. So we are proposing actually to have an on-site nursery along that eastern edge where we would actually grow the plant material that would be put into this site. So we're not paying for it for somebody else, but we're actually creating an opportunity for jobs. We're creating an opportunity for economic growth in the creation of this naturalized landscape in the lowlands of the park. None of that is of any good if you can't get to it. And so what we have proposed as part of this is nearly 5 miles of trails that are in the lower landscape, in addition to just under 2 miles of trail in the heart of the park. And so that kind of diversity of trail types, some of them paved, some of them soft, some of them wide, some of them narrow, allow for, again, a variety of opportunities to engage with and experience the park in time and in its transformation. And so in many ways, while we've not tried to unbraid the river and pull it back into the park, what we have chosen to do is unbraid the greenbelt. And so rather than it being the kind of highway that runs along the edge of the park, actually thinking about it as a space that starts to pull into the park itself. So people who don't even know about EXPO Idaho Park discover it as they pass by. Or people who come to the Expo and don't realize there's a park there, discover that, oh, I can get on the greenbelt in this location. And so it's in that network that we start to build these integrated connections with the community and with the region. The other thing that this does is provide an enormous piece of flood protection. And so the way that we have proposed to grade this, all of the high investment areas are in the heart of the park. They're lifted up, and the areas that we're using to create the lowlands are cut down in. And so when it does flood, because it's going to flood, it's not going to adversely impact the areas of high investment, but it's going to flood in areas that are designed to flood and can recover quickly and don't require a huge amount of maintenance obligation from the county to recuperate them. So that's a bunch about design, but there's a other part of this equation that we have to think about, which is cost. And in our experience in parks like this, we often spend a lot of time thinking about capital cost, but we don't think about operations and maintenance cost, and we don't think about life cycle replacement. And one of the things, I wish Brian from PROS was here with us today. He wasn't able to join us. But one of the things that we would propose to do at the beginning, should we be lucky enough to continue to work with you on this project, is talking about these cost implications in terms of what it means to build a park like this, not just in terms of constructing it, but over generations in terms of the obligation to Ada County and its taxpayers. We very much have gone through an exercise in speculating and testing program, but there really needs to be an impactful study. We need to be able to understand cost recovery. We need to understand partnering opportunities. We need to understand the market. We've not had the chance to do all that. We've not had the chance to talk with you all or the community in thinking about this project. There is a level of service that you all are anticipating or expecting, and we want to understand what that is. We may be providing way more here than you really want to take on. We might not be providing enough, but that's something that we want to engage with you in defining in terms of what is easy and what is difficult. And then just thinking about who's going to use this place and how they're going to use this place is as an essential piece of the puzzle. And I point all this out because obviously ARPA is a great resource, but that's not going to be the only resource in terms of how this park gets built. We want to think about partnerships. We want to think about endowments. We want to think about grants and all of these other sources that are central to the creation of public space in the 21st century. And we have the team who can do that with you. We're not asking you to have those answers and hand those over to us. We want to work with you in drawing those answers out so that we can deliver this project. This is not a schematic design. We cannot go out there and build this park today. We need to go through a process of master planning. We can do that in a compressed way, but there's a lot of questions. There's actually more questions, I think, today, perhaps than there were in August, that we need to get your feedback on and answers on as we would move forward. This is an image from the grandstand, looking out over the pump track, over the lowlands, to the riparian corridor, to the ridge beyond. And what I love about it is it's the layeredness of it. It's the complexity of it. It's all of those things sort of collapsed into one experience. And that's, I think, the opportunity here in this park, is collapsing that complexity into a landscape that's unlike any other in Boise, probably unlike any other in Idaho, might be unlike any other in the Western United States, if not the whole of the country. And I think that's really exciting. And again, that doesn't mean we have to blow a huge budget to do it. It just means we have to think about where the priorities sit in the creation of this park. I promise I'm going to wrap up here. We submitted a proposal, a qualifications document in July. And we said there's a set of priorities that we think any park needs to have to achieve success. It needs to prioritize recreation and biodiversity. It needs to think about circulation. It needs to think about how it connects to what's around it. It has to take on the river. It has to think about its relationship to the river. It needs to have high-level ecological performance, and it needs to be charismatic. It needs to be a place that people take pictures of, they think about, they have memories of, and that charismatic landscape is anchored by compelling architecture. We've added to that time. We didn't think about time necessarily when we put our proposal together, but I think time is central to the success of this park. That we can deliver something in 4 years that meets the requirements of the grant, that we can deliver something that in the near term, next decade of investment in Garden City provides for that community and provides for those new populations, and that we can do something on this park that sets the terms for the future in terms of public space in Boise. This is a legacy-defining opportunity. There's no question about that. Our proposal looks to sustain that legacy. It's not just the money in the ARPA grant. It's about a much longer term time threshold that we want to think about. It's a project that's about economic growth, but is also about environmental performance and ecology. That those two things aren't in conflict with one another, but actually go hand in hand. And it's a framework for nature and play. We don't have to pick one or the other. As the ULI told you, you can do both. You can do all of these things on this site. You just have to think carefully about how we put them together. And with that, I'd love to answer any questions of what we didn't cover in the last 35 minutes. Thank you.
Wow, I just got to breathe for a second. That was good.
Me too.
Forgive me.
Oh, actually, we have some reports. We should hand reports out. So
thank you.
You can read the things that we may have just said.
So I don't want to draw too much attention to my after-work activities, but I love nature. And I've noticed through the years I've lived here that there are parts of the green space, that river, that don't look anything like Boise as you travel farther west and even farther east. And it's development that's, kind of made it not look the same. And returning that space to the river, I love that reference to that 50s map. And I'd written down and circled, and I wanted to reference, hey, how long does that take? And then you immediately answered it, that it could be a generational endeavor to transform that. So talk to us about precedents and places you've done that before, and what's the community response to spending 15, 10, $5 million, or whatever the number is, and then letting them know that, well, you're really not going to see the fullness of this for another 10 years or 20 years.
I think what it comes down to is cultivating a sense of stewardship. So the community feels like they're participating in that. One of the projects that in a prior life I had the opportunity to work on, actually with Marlon's office, is in Memphis, where we were involved in a large park called Shelby Farms. And one of the things that park project did was bring inner city Memphis kids out to plant a tree. And so the purpose of planting that tree was that they had an experience in nature that they had never had before. And by planting that tree, it gave them something that they could bring their grandparent back to, they could bring their sister back to and say, I planted this, and you can go back 3 years from now and you see it grow. So stewardship, I think, is central to this, and sort of engaging with the community in the activities of whether it's sort of evaluating the kind of citizen science of the transformation, whether it's cleanup events or other opportunities for sort of getting everybody out on site. I think that's where the sort of managing expectations comes in, which I think your question to some degree is managing expectations. Part of this is also, though, that we are giving the community a really robust and really exciting landscape on year 4, right? In 2026, when the heart of the park opens, everybody's excited about that. And there is a trail system, and the earthwork is underway, and there is planting, and there is the nursery, and they can see the change coming, but that we would use it as an opportunity for education, whether it's through interpretive signage, whether it's through other sort of forms of stewardship to manage those expectations of the community. I'm going to preemptively answer a question that I hope I'm going to get about engagement, which was asked of the first group. One of the things that we love to do in our practice with engagement is get people and communities out on site with us. We don't really love being in rooms around tables. We prefer to be out in the landscape with the users of that landscape. And the reason that we like that is because you end up having informal and casual conversations where you get more interesting tidbits of information in those dialogues than you would around a survey. We do surveys, we do online interactions, we build digital models that people can fly through. We do all of those things, but for us, engagement is about event and about occupation of the site that we're working on. And so, Josh, to your question, I mean, if this is a working landscape, a landscape that is being changed, we would look for opportunities to get people out there on that landscape, not keep them behind a fence or not keep them away from it, but actually let them get into it and see it and experience that change over the years.
Thank you. I've got so many questions. If everybody's being quiet.
No, I'm ready to go.
I've got one as well. I think your organic approach is fabulous for the development of this park. However, one of the main functions of this area of the Expo environs is an amphitheater, entertainment, and to take advantage of the location of the grandstands for those events. And Bob, you could probably follow up with more detailed. I didn't see any of that in your presentation. I didn't know if that's part of it, or you were going to wait till programming.
Nope, it's a central part. It's a little bit different in configuration. One of the joys of 103 slides is you got to scroll back through them. So this isn't necessarily in that configuration, and maybe I should jump to the plan, but the idea is that the area to the north of the grandstand is this great lawn. And that great lawn has a capacity for a couple thousand people to be there, and that the exploration center is tipped and sort of oriented so that you get a stage on that.
Okay.
So the idea is that that space, rather than being behind the grandstand and cut off from the expo, actually spills into this lawn area that we create near the Western Town, I think is what it's called there. And so the idea is that Western Town could be a place of food trucks and vendors and all sorts of activity that could spill into that great lawn, and that you could have the performance there as part of that. We would scale that for what you need in terms of your expectations, but the thought was that, what we heard about the grandstands, that it sounds not great, it kind of bounces off of it, it's a little bit tinny. Converting this into a kind of community facility that provides the kind of indoor spaces that are needed within the park, as well as potential revenue sources like a restaurant or like a small retail related to sports. Focusing that on that, but also the views. The views off the grandstand are spectacular, so we don't want to lose that. But the performance of the event was really thought about just to the north of that.
What do you anticipate for capacity?
In that space? I could throw a number out, Bob, but I'd be making it up. I mean, I think it's probably a couple thousand people that we could get in there.
We look at 17,000 when we do shows.
Okay, so that's a number that I'm hearing for the first time. So we would right size that. We would look to calibrate for that. I mean, I think there's, in many ways, the way that I would suggest that we think about what we've put forward today is that it's a framework. It sets certain priorities and it sets certain relationships, but every aspect of this can be recalibrated based upon your needs once we know what those needs are.
So I really appreciate you bringing up that this isn't just about the capital costs, right? This is a long-term legacy project over decades, and it's going to take time and partnerships and a lot of funding opportunities, which include sponsorships, right? Does anyone in your partnership in your group have experience with starting or working with, it'd probably be a 501c3, a foundation, and working with those partners, because we see that as a big part of making this successful in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, so the majority of our clients, quite honestly, are 501c3 or sort of public-private collaborations. We rarely have a client who is just a municipality that we're working with. So we're used to that model. I would say the other part of that is that pros will be exceptionally helpful in defining what format that could take. So we can look at other examples, other sort of precedents that are of a related scale, of a related kind of metropolitan region, sort of, all of the demographics that go into that to say, this is the model that makes the most sense for this kind of project. So, when every one of the things about creating public space in the United States is that every place is different. Everyone has their own model of management and of capital creation, and we've learned and sort of developed a depth of knowledge because of those experiences. But certainly both pros as well as us can start to advise and help sort of in dialogue with what the park wants to become, define who's going to manage and operate this in the best possible way. And that's great. To have that happening simultaneously, I think, is a wonderful opportunity.
Thank you.
What about it? Oh, yeah, actually, great. So the Exploration Center to the north, thank you, Nick Jabs from Port. The Exploration Center up until Saturday evening was called the Discovery Center, but then we realized you all have a Discovery Center already, so we had to quickly rename it. But there's a project in Philadelphia that is similar in its character, and I can log back in, that is a partnership between Philadelphia Parks and Recreation, the Fairmount Park Conservancy, which is the not-for-profit that manages the parks, and the Audubon Society. And so the Audubon Society uses that facility for a number of their programs, for exhibitions and learning opportunities, and that actually Brian Trusty from Pros, who is on our team, previously was with the Audubon Society and was central to that partnership creation for the city of Philadelphia. So that's a sort of an immediate example of the way that those partnerships could get created.
Thank you.
You talk about your thoughts on revenue generation and where that's going to come from and what the main source of income would be for this park.
So I'm going to go to a plan maybe. So one of the things that we heard when we were here in August was that this is public money and therefore this park needs to be very public with the ARPA grants. So we have conceptualized this project very much as 100% public. So there isn't necessarily anything in this that wouldn't be available for use. However, we do think about the sort of, in particular, the Exploration Center and the grandstand as being revenue generators, in the sense that you could have a kind of destination restaurant that has, or beer garden that has views out over the landscape that people coming to the expo could come to. You might have small retail facilities in this that have sports equipment or the mountain bike equipment that would be used in and around the park. One of the things that we know is that mountain bike users, we've done a number of projects that are sort of mountain bike centric, have a high level of disposable income, and so having that as a kind of retail opportunity in here might be a potential driver. Leasing out the spaces of the Exploration Center, whether it's for weddings or other kinds of events, are there, and then obviously the events or the concerts and performances would be an opportunity for revenue generation as well. There's smaller facilities, concession facilities, in some of the outpost buildings that could also create revenue. And then depending on how you manage it, one of the things that we've been thinking about is structured parking or parallel parking along the edge. The parking costs could go into the park operations as well, depending on how that model looks like in terms of enforcement and management. So I would say that the revenue opportunities are really very much at the edge, and that maybe the other one that we would have to think a little bit more about would be the nursery. The nursery, once this park was established, actually started to become something that was publicly available in terms of its resources. I didn't mention this, but that one of the larger parking areas is associated with that as a kind of trailhead to get into the green belt. Maybe just to add one additional thought to that, I think it's really important that this park makes the expo better, and I think it's really important that the expo influences the way that we think about the park. That they're not two separate pieces, but they're actually strongly tied to one another in a dialogue with one another. So I would assume that the revenue story would have to be tied between those two things.
We go down and look at your rendering, just like we did the other piece.
Please.
Let's go to it right now. We can look at-
Did Scott have one question before I go down
I
there?
see you only have one parking lot here because you've taken all the rest of the way with these income of housing and mixed development, and then you got our new baseball stadium and a new
We're not proposed. So we have on
that
the,
just fun and frill on
No,
added
no,
to
no,
it.
No, it's so on the park lot, on the park itself, we have 3 lots, one here, one here, one here, in addition to parallel parking at the edge. I think when we calculated that, it's about 150 spaces across those 3 areas. We, like many of the other teams, have been thinking about the big surface lot for the expo as being a place that can be used in the near term when there's not an event here. Looking at the ULI recommendations, there was discussion of structured parking that we would hope to be able to sort of, again, going back to that point about the expo and the park being in dialogue with one another. What we were trying to show with the urban development was really just saying, we know all of these things are on the table. The ULI report put those forward. Here's a way that we might think about how they would be configured, but this park is not dependent on what we're showing happening.
Right, because I've done enough events where you could have 5 or 6 of these going on in one parking spot and you don't have enough.
Yeah. So then again, that's the sort of the.
Because like you say, they have to work intertwined.
Yeah. And so the capacity question, I think, is one that we would want to work through, and presumably any new development would have parking obligations associated with it as well. So it's
Just was curious.
Yeah. No, by all means, I think, like the other 2 teams, we think about this park as a place that you're coming to on bike, on scooter, running on the green belt. It's not, we don't want it to be automobile dependent, but certainly we don't want it to not be, we don't want the sort of, we don't want to divert.
You don't want to be overloaded with parking. I get it. Thank you.
Did you have questions?
Sure, thank you. I would just say congratulations again, and to get to this point, excellent job on the presentation. I think getting through 103 slides in 35 minutes is a bold move, regardless.
You'll get used to that because we do it all the time.
the integration of the river and the concept you provided, I think, really highlights the natural resource components, the ecological components in a realistic manner. I think that's important. I do question a little bit about your use of the proximity to the river for recreational access to the river itself. Is that something your team considered quite a bit and maybe sort of walk back, into the site more given those, I guess, challenges with the floodway? Could you speak to that maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so the facilities that are out there are principally the sort of trail system and the kind of the various landscape types that we are talking about. And there's a tower. There's the tower that Justin described, which is sort of located, out here as a kind of wayfinding device, something that you would see from the heart of the park, but also something that you would see from the Greenbelt. At some level, we took the park boundaries in places and we blurred them. We moved outside of them, but that was one boundary that we didn't blur because we don't know enough yet about what the obligations are. I think we absolutely want to animate and think about program along that edge. I think it has to be there. I think we wanted to focus the attention in some ways on the community side, knowing how underserved the Garden City is in terms of park space, and thinking about that as being our sort of priority. But certainly the Greenbelt and the river's edge, I think, could be programmed in a more intensive way. Again, cognizant of the fact it's going to flood, it's going to get damaged, it needs to sort of be calibrated to that reality. But yeah, that's maybe a thinner area of the programming that we have.
Thank you.
Let's go look.
Our model is a little less fancy.
It's never less than
And evaluators, we have about 5 minutes.
We have 6 pickleball courts. And they got shade. And they have shade. There's a pickleball when you're done. You put it in this grandstand here, the idea is that there's a kind of spine that sort of ties that all together, that would have lighting and seating along it, so that there's really a sense of connection to the stuff for the Exploration Center and the Great Lawn. This area, as I said before, we organized this based upon the existing parking. And so the idea was trying to minimize as much of the existing planting.
Yeah, it's cool there. I'm with you.
To install sports. But again, the kind of amount of athletic surface that we want is something that to improve. But we're really interested in being able to create places for people to hang out. So there's bocce and there's benches. There's lots of seating and lots of shade in this area. You'll notice in our renderings we have this idea of a kind of screen or sort of a vertical element that define those spaces just to give them a sense of scale. And then this really becomes the kind of gateway when you have
So proud.
the small community stage, the big sort of tribune seating looking over it, and then structured play that leads into more adventure play that leads you down into that kind of natural environment. In a similar way, these can all be kind of reconfigured because they need 5 baseball fields and no soccer pitches or vice versa. That's something that you can adjust, but you're really thinking about this as being a part
Planning, Boise planning, zoning meeting.
So really, the entire western edge, southern edge, and even to an extent, eastern edge, I think that you can actually get into the park from those. What do you mean, the area? So this is what we're showing. This is 88 acres. And so this is the one little piece we sort of configured it. The site boundary that we were given actually runs along here and turns back and sort of does this. This is a piece that is on Expo ground, but as we said, the way that it's really programmatic-wise is really serving both of those facilities. So that really grows it a little bit. That's Western. So rather
that's the gazebo.
Rather than a big parking lot, thinking of that as a kind of event space where you could, as I said, you could have vendors, you could have different facilities in there that then connect to the sort of big promenade in the middle and then the great campus. Not 17,000 people, but a couple thousand people.
Yeah,
So this is actually the river corridor. So this is what is there today. What we're building is all of this sort of topography that works its way around either through existing channels, sort of expansion of the existing lake. Also, was that about where so we didn't keep the loop of the racetrack, but there are a couple of moments where it reappears. So that arc and that bridge that was in one of our views is sort of a remnant of that circuit. There's another piece of it down here with its recreated kind of reinterpretation of the tower as an element of the design.
Commissioners, evaluators, so we're coming to that time.
Thank you.
All right, that concludes our presentations for today, but I want to thank all of our finalists,
Thank you so
presenters
much,
for coming out. Thank you so much.
Sticking with us today.
I need to gather our evaluators, so if you'll make your way to follow Bruce to the operations room. Thanks, everybody, for coming out. Appreciate it.